You ever wonder what prison was like before they invented soap, sunlight, or basic human rights? Well, buckle up, because tonight we're tossing you into the frozen pit of medieval Russia. A place where the walls weep ice and the rats might be the only ones listening. Welcome to The Drowsy Historian, where we tuck you in with nightmares from history. Chapter 1, Shackled in the Snow. Your first hour in a Russian dungeon. Welcome to Russia. Not the romantic one with domes and vodka shots and ballerinas twirling under chandeliers. No, your Russia is medieval, brutal, unfiltered. A place where mercy is a rumour, and dungeons are less like jail cells and more like slow-motion burial chambers. You're a prisoner now, and if you're lucky, you'll die quickly. If you're not, well, let's take a look. Let's begin with your grand arrival. You've been dragged from your village, maybe for stealing bread, maybe for offending a noble, maybe just for existing with the wrong face near the wrong guard. There's no jury, no paperwork, no dramatic gavel slams. One bad word and you're shoved in a cart next to a guy with a caved-in jaw who may or may not be dead. Welcome to justice, 13th century style. The journey to prison isn't just a ride, it's a test. The cart has no suspension, just rattling wheels over frozen dirt roads, hitting rocks like gods playing whack-a-mole. Your wrists are bound with ropes soaked in old blood and horse piss. The guards joke as you bounce. One of them lights a cigarette using pages torn from a Bible. Classic. Now you arrive. And here's the first surprise. Russia didn't always build grand stone castles with ominous gates for prisoners. Oh no. In many regions, especially early on, dungeons were literally dugouts, pit prisons. Earth-walled holes covered with logs or sticks, sunk into the permafrost like some sadistic root cellar. You might see a crude wooden building if you're in a larger settlement. One room, no windows, and a door designed to groan like a dying ox every time it opens. Step inside. Don't worry, you'll adjust to the stench eventually. The floor's packed mud, layered in centuries of human misery. Straw is scattered, not to provide comfort, but to soak up fluids. And by fluids, we mean blood, sweat, urine, and occasionally bits of someone who used to be whole. There's no ventilation. One tiny hole lets in just enough light to remind you how dark it is. The walls are sweating, literally. Moisture runs down them from snowmelt above, mixed with mildew and old rot. You'd think the cold would keep things cleaner, but no. Mold loves this place. So do lice. So do rats. In fact, the rats have names here that have been around longer than most guards. You're tossed onto the ground like firewood, landing beside two men and what might have once been a woman. One of them groans. Another stares, wide-eyed, muttering something in a mix of prayer and curse. You try to sit up. The ceiling's so low your head hits wood. You hunch. This will be your posture now, half-seated, half-bent, full suffering. A guard spits and slams the door shut. You're now officially forgotten. No schedule, no lights out, no lights on. Just an endless grey churn of time measured by the rhythm of your own suffering. And then the cold hits. And not like turn up the heater cold. This is the kind of cold that inhabits you. It finds your bones and gnaws on them like the rats do your feet. Your breath hangs in the air like a ghost, and your fingers go numb, then swollen, then black. There's no fire. The guards say firewood is for citizens. If you want warmth, pray. But pray quietly. Noise irritates the guards, and irritation gets punished. Oh, did we mention punishment? Let's talk chains. Your ankles and wrists might be clamped in iron cuffs bolted to the floor or to each other. These are hand-forged from pig iron, rough, rusty and unyielding. There's no padding. After a few hours, your skin starts to break. By morning, you're bleeding. By day 3, the iron is fused with your flesh. If infection sets in, the guards might help you by sawing off the limb. We should mention your roommate now. Let's call him Ivan. He's been here for 4 months. Accused of hiding grain from a local tax officer, his eyes are sunken. He mumbles about snow demons and licks his own lips constantly. He once bit a rat in half. He offers you the other half with a grin like cracked leather. You politely decline. Ivan will probably die soon, but he'll be your only guide to survival, so try not to insult him. Let's zoom out a moment. You may be wondering, was this common? Yes, very. In Kievan Rus and later the Muscovite period, the concept of incarceration was less about reform and more about suffering. Dungeons weren't about holding you for trial, they were the punishment. People rotted in them for months, even years, often without ever seeing a judge. The Orthodox Church occasionally advocated for Christian mercy, but it usually amounted to, maybe, don't beat them too hard on Sundays. And remember, this isn't Siberia yet. That horror's coming in future centuries. But even in central Russian towns like Novgorod or Moscow, the dungeons were bad enough to make grown men soil themselves on approach. Food? Ha! Once a day, maybe. A crust of rye bread so stale you could chip a tooth. A cup of watery kasha if you're lucky. Guards might feed you through a hole in the door. Or not at all. Many prisoners relied on family members to bring them food. But if your family is dead, or poor, or simply over it, then so are you. Here's a fun fact. Some prisoners dug into their own flesh just to feel something. Others carved words into the walls using bone or fingernails. These weren't poems. They were names, dates, and screams. I am still here, scratched again and again in desperate Cyrillic. And what about escape, please? Even if you managed to slip your chains, pick a lock, and sneak past the guards, you'd still be in the middle of a hostile forest with no shoes, no food, and probably minus 20 degrees outside. You'd die of exposure before breakfast. And in case you thought bribery might help, think again. Unless you've got rubles stuffed in an unmentionable place, the guards aren't listening. And even then, they might just take the bribe and kill you anyway. Criticism time. For all their complex theology, elaborate court rituals, and imperial ambitions, medieval Russian rulers sure knew how to treat their prisoners like livestock. There were no standards, no oversight. If a noble's goat got a better pen than a human prisoner, well, that was expected. Goats don't complain. Prisoners might. So you lie back if you can and try to sleep. But between the damp, the howling wind outside, the whispers of Ivan chewing rat meat, and the soft scraping of something crawling in your hair, you wonder, how did this happen? The answer, of course, is simple. You were born here. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong social class. And in medieval Russia, that was a crime in itself. You'd think, after the first night, your body would start adapting. That maybe, like the peasants in stories, you'd harden to the cold or find warmth in prayer. No. That's a lie told by people who've never tried sleeping on rotting hay in sub-zero temperatures while a half-dead man breathes into their eye socket. If anything, the second day is worse. Not because it gets colder, though it does, but because you understand now. You're not here to wait for justice. You're here to disappear. The air you breathe tastes like damp wool, rust, and mold. Every inhale is a gamble. Will your lungs fill with air, or with the black spores blooming on the walls? There's no real airflow, just the occasional icy draft that trickles in from a crack somewhere above the boards, offering no comfort, only reminding you how far underground you've fallen. Your breath fobs in front of your face, a pitiful signal that you're still alive, at least for now. You watch it dissipate into the dark and wonder when it'll stop. Morning and night blur together. There's no window, no clock, no bell. Only the sound of boots scraping outside, the shift in temperature, the rhythmic squeaking of rats nesting behind the wall. Eventually, a hatch opens above. A metal bucket is shoved in, sloshing with something grey and vaguely edible. It's called belanda, a prisoner's soup. But calling it soup is an insult to water. It's tepid liquid with a floating grain or two, maybe a beet skin if you're feeling blessed. You cup it with your fingers, drink it straight from the bucket, burn your lips, and feel nothing. It's not food. It's the bare minimum needed to keep you conscious enough to suffer longer. Now you shift your legs. That was a mistake. Your ankle chain has rubbed so deep into the skin that it tears when you move. The iron ring cuts clean through the scab that tried to form overnight. The pain is sharp, bright, but brief. Your body is already forgetting how to feel. And just as you curse, You hear Ivan mumbling again. He's whispering to the rats now. Names, maybe prayers. The man once had a wife. She used to bring him food until she died in childbirth last winter. He stopped talking to people after that. Only rodents. They listen, he says, unlike God. One corner of the cell is darker than the rest. That's the latrine, if you can call it that. Just a hole in the ground, sometimes frozen over, sometimes not. There's no privacy, no curtain, no shame. You're meant to crawl over and relieve yourself in front of the others. Some choose not to. They use the floor. After all, dignity died with the sun. The stink is so thick you can taste it. And in the worst irony of all, when the cold is sharpest, the smell eases. Frost masks rot. So now you hope for colder nights just to dull your own nose. Occasionally, a new prisoner gets tossed in. Some scream, some collapse. Most cry. The guards love that. They laugh through the cracks in the door, mocking names, tossing insults like bones. Little birdies weeping, they say. Soon they'll be quiet. And they're not wrong. Give it 2 days, and even the loudest end up curled in silence, staring into the mud, praying for fever. Because a good fever can kill you quick. And death here is a gift. Outside, Russia remains indifferent. Snow continues to fall. Boyars and princes argue over lands, taxes, and the church. The Tsar's agents move through the provinces, sniffing out rebellion, witchcraft, and unpaid dues. Most people outside these walls pretend dungeons like this don't exist. They think prisoners are criminals. Deserve it. But ask around, and you'll find stories of farmers arrested for late grain, of children imprisoned for stealing kindling, of widows locked away for gossip. Justice here has no face, only a boot. Let's pause for a reality check. These weren't rare exceptions. Medieval Russia's penal system wasn't structured for rehabilitation. It wasn't even structured for records. Often there wasn't a system. Local governors and landowners could build their own private prisons, decide their own punishments, hold men and women indefinitely. You might disappear into one of these wooden crypts for decades. And when your bones are finally dumped into a forest trench, no one records your name. Just male, approx. 30, if that. Back in the cell, your body begins betraying you. Your gums swell, your teeth ache, your toes have turned a dusky blue. You try to shift your weight, but your muscles rebel. Hunger gnaws constantly. Not the sharp, urgent hunger of skipping lunch. No. This is the deep, eroding hunger that sinks. It makes your thoughts blur, your vision tunnel. You hallucinate warmth, you think of meat. Then you think of Ivan, and you push the thought away. There's a scratching sound. A rat is dragging something, a finger bone maybe, or part of your bread crust. You don't bother chasing it. Even the rats eat better than you do. Once, someone killed a rat and tried to roast it over a candle flame. The smell was so bad it made everyone vomit. Still, they ate it. You would too. But you're not that desperate yet. Give it time. Criticism? Oh, let's get to it. For all the religious preaching of the era, the supposed divine order, this entire system was designed with the efficiency of a sadist. If hell had a waiting room, it would look like this. The Orthodox clergy might offer last rites, sure, but they never questioned why so many needed them. The state claimed order. The boyars claimed loyalty. But all they really did was ensure the poor stayed scared and the accused stayed broken. You try to sleep again. Your back itches from lice. Your wrist pulses. Ivan mutters. Snow creaks above. And as you curl into your corner, you realize the most terrifying part isn't the cold or the hunger or even death. It's the knowing that no one's coming. No rescuer. No verdict. Just you, your memories, and the slow, methodical unraveling of what used to be your sanity. Chapter 2. The smell of guilt. Rotting corpses and no privy. If you've made it past the first few days in the Russian dungeon, congratulations. That means you're not dead. Not yet. But don't let that inspire hope. Because now the real experience begins. You've passed the phase of shock. Your body has gone numb to the cold. Your stomach's forgotten the concept of fullness and your dignity. Well, that froze off sometime around the first time you had to relieve yourself while a stranger stared at your bare backside. And now comes the smell. The constant, inescapable, haunting stench of death, decay, and disgrace. Let's paint the picture clearly. These dungeons weren't built with hygiene in mind. There was no drainage system, no running water, no ventilation beyond what snow or rodents accidentally carved open through the roof. The human body, meanwhile, continues doing what it does, sweating, excreting, bleeding, shedding. Multiply that by 20 people crammed into a space meant for 5, and you're not in a prison. You're in a fermentation vat for human misery. The toilet is still that one hole in the corner, remember? Except now it's full and frozen. And someone slipped in it last night because the floor is too slick and the ceiling too low to navigate properly. There's no schedule, no privacy, and no cleaning. The hole is symbolic at best. Most people squat where they sit, too weak or numb to crawl. The straw you sleep on is soaked through. And if you think you're going to get used to the smell, think again. The human brain may be able to dull certain sensory inputs, but the smell of 30 unwashed bodies urinating, defecating, vomiting, and occasionally dying in the same room is not one of them. It doesn't fade. It changes, morphs with the seasons. In summer, it's thick and sour. In winter, it's metallic and cold, but it never leaves. Let's address the dead, because yes, people die in here, not occasionally. Often, one every few days, depending on the dungeon. From fever, from injury, from infection, from sheer exhaustion. And what happens when someone dies? Nothing. Not right away. The guards don't rush in. There are no coroners. You report it if you're brave enough to yell, and maybe in a day or two the body gets dragged out. Maybe. If the guards are drunk, it'll take longer. You'll just have to sleep next to the corpse. Or over it. Or on it. Depends how cramped the cell is that day. Sometimes the dead aren't noticed for days. Their skin turns waxy, then greenish, then begins to split. The rats get to them first. You learn quickly to stay away from a body with twitching toes. It means something else is using it. One time, a man named Piotr died quietly in the corner. By the time the guards removed him, the lower half of his face was gone, bitten clean through. And nobody screamed. Nobody cried. We just watched, silently, as they dragged him out like a sack of spoiled grain. Food continues to come once a day, if the guard remembers. Sometimes they don't. Or they throw it in and let it land in the filth, daring you to crawl for it. One time, someone vomited in the soup bucket and didn't tell anyone. We found out too late. That week, 5 prisoners died of gut rot. And the smell that week, the smell turned sweet, sickly, sugary, like rotten fruit and blood. It's stuck in your teeth. By now your skin is changing. Lesions open around your joints. Your gums are receding. You haven't passed a solid bowel movement in days, and when you do, it's black. Your breath smells like copper in decay. And you know what's worse? You can't even smell yourself anymore. You've blended in with the background stench. You are part of the rot now. Let's not pretend this is an accident. This isn't just how things were. This is design. A punishment that extends beyond bars and chains. The authorities knew what these places were like. They wanted them like this. The idea was simple. Make prison so unbearable that death is a mercy. They didn't have the resources to guard, feed, and process prisoners the way modern states do. So they outsourced suffering to the environment. Let cold and disease do the work, cheaper than paying for rope. And let's not forget who these prisoners were. Not all hardened criminals. Some were peasants who failed to meet a grain quota. Some were debtors. Others were scapegoats for crimes committed by noblemen. There's a record of a woman in the 1400s thrown into a Moscow dungeon for overswearing during a church dispute. She died a month later. Her crime? Yelling too loudly in the wrong building? Meanwhile, the church, pious and powerful, remained largely silent. Priests might come once a year to perform mass over the cells, but they never entered. They stood outside, waved incense, said prayers. Sometimes the guards beat prisoners into silence for that ceremony. Wouldn't want the holy men disturbed by the sound of human agony after all. Now you notice something else. The walls are moving, or at least you think they are. It's hard to tell in the dark, but the flicker of a torch outside shows it maggots, crawling through the timbers, growing in the straw, living off the uncleaned blood that seeps into the cracks. They don't bite, but they squirm. And you feel them under your skin at night, in your clothes, maybe in your wounds. You're not sure anymore what's real. Ivan once said he saw a maggot crawl out of his eye. We laughed. Then we stopped laughing. Criticism time. If ever there was proof that a civilization's values could be found in its prisons, medieval Russia deserves every harsh word. The state cared about order, not life. Pain was policy. Dirt was punishment. And forget rehabilitation. There was no after here. You either left in a cart, feet first, or you never left at all, and through it all, the smell. It settles into your hair, your pores, your soul. It follows you in dreams. It is guilt, punishment, death and silence all rolled into one ever-present stench. They say memory is tied to scent. If that's true, then this place will haunt your mind forever. Even if you somehow escape, even if you live, you'll never forget it. Because once you've breathed in the dungeon, truly breathed it in, you carry it with you, and part of you never leaves. There is a point in every prisoner's life where the body stops resisting and starts surrendering, not from cowardice, but from calculation. The muscles understand they won't be used for escape. The stomach realizes food isn't coming in, forms it recognizes. Even the skin, so diligent for decades, stops healing. A cut becomes a rot, a bruise becomes an ulcer, and all the while, the smell of the cell continues fermenting, curling into every breath, turning your lungs into graves, in training. It's the second week now, maybe third, maybe longer. Time is meaningless here. The guards don't track your sentence. They track how well you obey, how quietly you rot. And you no longer ask what day it is. You only ask if anyone died last night, because fewer bodies mean more room to shift your hips and fewer groans in the dark. You used to be horrified by corpses. Now, you're grateful when they stop twitching. A still body doesn't steal food. A quiet corpse doesn't sob. Disease has begun its full symphony. First came the lice. They don't bite. They drink. And they never sleep. You scratch until your nails break. Then you scratch with bone. Your skin is no longer a barrier. It's a buffet. Then came the boils. Oozing, pulsing mounds on thighs, backs, necks. No treatment, no bandage. Just the warmth of pus in winter and the flies in summer. Some prisoners try to drain them. Some lick them open, hoping the taste of iron means their body's still working. You've learnt the sounds of plague. The barking cough, sharp and wet, followed by a silence that grows heavy. Then a hiss of breath. Then nothing. A man named Semyon died like that beside you. His leg was black to the knee. No one dared touch him. His body stayed for 2 days, until the guards noticed the smell had changed. They dragged him out by his feet. His head bounced against the doorframe. No one flinched. Let's talk about water. Or rather, the liquid they offer in its place. Twice a day, a bucket is shoved in. It's brown. It has a smell. It sometimes moves. You're supposed to drink it. You do. Because your mouth is dry, your lips are cracked, and thirst hurts worse than pride. Sometimes they boil snow, sometimes they don't. Either way, it brings fever. Dysentery follows. You shit blood, then mucus, then nothing. Just pain. You ask Ivan for help, but he's too busy chasing flies with his tongue. He believes he's a saint now. Said he saw the Virgin Mary in the mildew stain by the ceiling. Maybe he did. Maybe she wept. No one talks anymore. Whispers maybe. A word, a nod. Language degrades quickly here. Vocabulary shrinks. Grunts return. Human speech becomes a luxury of the healthy. You forget words. You forget names. You even forget your own voice. When you do try to speak, it's hoarse, thick. Your tongue feels swollen, foreign, like it belongs to someone who used to be you. And yet, despite the filth, the rot, the death, there is routine. Waking, if you can call it that. Eating, if there's food. Shivering, always. Staring at the wall, picking lice, trying not to vomit, trying to keep the sores clean with spit, trying not to cry, because crying brings attention. And attention brings punishment. A groan too loud, a cough too violent. These are crimes now. The guard might enter, swinging a club, choosing one prisoner at random to suffer as an example. You pray it's not you pray it's not Ivan. Then you stop praying altogether. The architecture of the cell is its own torture. Ceilings so low you must hunch. Walls so close your shoulders brush the person next to you. No windows, one door, one hatch, no air circulation. The mould isn't on the walls, it's in them. It lives in the wood, the straw, the dirt. You breathe it every day. You eat it in your bread. You feel it in your lungs. You cough up green. No one cares. There are stories told in whispers, in myth, that some prisoners turn to cannibalism. It's not well documented, but then again, neither is anything down here. Official records ignore these pits, but the rumours persist. A man gnawing on a hand he swore was just lying around. A woman found with bloodied teeth after a child went missing. Who's to say? When you're surrounded by death and starving, the rules of decency rot faster than flesh. Let's take a detour. In Muscovite Russia, especially between the 14th and 16th centuries, dungeons weren't meant to be seen. They weren't tourable prisons like the Tower of London. They were buried things, shameful things. The state used them not just for punishment but for erasure. People were thrown in, and if no one inquired, they vanished. Families often assumed their loved ones had died in war or run away. That was easier than admitting they were living beneath the streets, stacked in the dark, dying slowly. There's even record of secret cells under churches. Yes, churches. Beneath sanctuaries where choirs sang hymns and priests burned incense, there were holes dug for the spiritually unworthy. Heretics, rebels, people who mocked the clergy. One bishop in Novgorod kept a private dungeon for such souls, said to cleanse them through stillness. Stillness here meant isolation, hunger, and the kind of silence that bends the mind. Monks would drop bread through slits. Sometimes they'd pray for the prisoner, sometimes they'd forget. Back in your cell, the scratching continues. The rats have multiplied. You wake with one sniffing your hair. You don't move. If you're lucky, it's just checking for lice. If you're unlucky, it's checking for softness. The softer your flesh, the closer you are to dying. The rats know this. They're better judges of life than the guards. Let's be honest, the only thing keeping you alive now is inertia. The body is stubborn. It clings. Even as your organs fail, even as your mind dissolves, your heart thumps on, not out of hope, out of habit. It doesn't know the conditions, it only knows rhythm, one beat, then another. And yet, amid all this, there is still judgment. Society outside believes you deserve this. They think you're a criminal, a monster. They don't know you stole bread to feed your sister, or that you refused a noble's advance, or that your father spoke ill of the Tsar in a tavern. Guilt in medieval Russia was a flexible concept. It stretched to fit whoever the powerful disliked, and once it fit, you were done. So now you lie here, in the dark, beside Ivan, surrounded by crawling things and the scent of death. Your body rots, your name fades, your mind begins to unravel. You ask one final question, not to God, not to the guards, not even aloud. You ask, was I ever alive at all? Chapter 3, Justice by Whim. Torture as entertainment. By now, you've accepted that you live in a box that smells like rot and sounds like coughing. You've stopped counting days. Your stomach doesn't growl anymore. It just aches in a quiet, resigned way. You're learning to sleep in shifts, curled between straw and stranger. Your cellmate Ivan has begun praying to a brick in the wall. You no longer question that. What you do question, what everyone questions, is when the real pain will start. Because in medieval Russia, imprisonment was never the worst part. It was just the warm-up. Justice here isn't blind. It's bored, sadistic, and drunk. The The guards don't need reasons to punish you. A glance, a twitch, a moan too loud in the night can invite a boot. And punishment isn't a matter of law, it's theatre. It's about showing the others what happens when you forget your place in the hierarchy of misery. The Russian term for torture, pytka, didn't just mean interrogation, it meant instruction through agony. And in many towns, it was public. Let's say you're pulled out of your cell. You don't know why, no one tells you. Maybe someone accused you of something. Maybe a noble got offended. Maybe your name came up during another prisoner's torture session. Doesn't matter. You're dragged out into daylight, squinting, shivering, blinded by the sudden reminder that the sky still exists. Your feet stumble over cobbles slick with filth. Your wrists are tied behind your back, your ribs poke out of torn linen, and you look less like a man and more like a scarecrow dipped in fever. You're taken to the podval, the torture cellar. If you're lucky, it's underground. If you're unlucky, it's a wooden shack in the centre of town with a stool, some rope, and a crowd already forming. Medieval Russians loved to show. Torture wasn't done in secret. It was proof that order was maintained. A form of moral education for everyone else. Let's walk through a few crowd favourites. First, the wheel. You're tied to a wagon wheel, limbs spread. A guard takes an iron bar and strikes between the spokes, slowly, rhythmically, until your bones begin to snap. Not all at once. The technique is to weaken, not kill. They want to hear the cracks. They want the silence between screams. Then there's the fire. Not flames exactly. Heated irons, pressed to skin. The hiss of boiling flesh is unforgettable. One prisoner in Kazan wrote, "Well, scratched," that the smell of his own burning feet followed him in his dreams, until he had no more dreams. And of course, the whip. This was practically standard. Braided leather soaked in salt water, sometimes studded with metal. Not just across the back, across the face, across the groin, across the soles of the feet. It wasn't about extracting information. It was about breaking identity. 1 lash for insolence, 2 for silence, 10 for no reason at all. Let's not forget the church's favourite, the rack. Your wrists and ankles are tied to rollers at opposite ends. Slowly, methodically, the ropes are cranked. You feel each tendon protest, each joint separate. You scream until your jaw locks, then you gurgle. Eventually your shoulders dislocate, ribs crack, sometimes your hips pop. The goal isn't to kill, it's to ruin. To make sure even if you survive, you return as something less than human. And for women? Ah yes, gender didn't earn mercy. Pregnant women were beaten into miscarriage. Accused witches had their fingernails torn off with hot tongs. Widows could be stripped, paraded, and beaten for suspected lustful heresies. One teenage girl in Novgorod was whipped to death for lying about chastity. The boy she accused of rape was never questioned. Back to you. Let's say today you're the example. You're bound to a post in the square. The crowd is mostly peasants, some nobles, a priest or two watching from under a cowl. A child points and laughs. His mother hushes him, but she's smiling. The guard reads your crime, something vague, like dishonour or conspiracy. Then he strikes. Once. Twice. Again, the first lash feels like fire. The second tears skin. The third hits bone. You lose count. You lose consciousness. And when you wake, you're back in the dungeon face down, ribs shattered, pissing blood. Why? That's the wrong question. There is no why. There is only who. Who was offended? Who had power? Who decided today needed violence? Russian justice in this era was built on spectacle. If the boyars needed order, they staged suffering. If the church needed repentance, they demanded blood. There were no appeals, no second chances. The word trial was a formality, a murmur before the screams. Sometimes they didn't even record your name. Just, offender punished. That was enough. Now, here's the dark irony. Many people in the crowd enjoyed the spectacle. Not because they were cruel, though some were, but because watching someone else suffer made their own chains feel looser. "At least I'm not him," they'd whisper. "At least my back is unbroken." It was a psychology of survival, a community of cruelty. You didn't look away because looking away made you suspicious. And suspicion was a one-way ticket to your own starring role. Let's widen the lens. Across Russia, especially during times of famine or unrest, torture became more frequent. It wasn't random, it was policy. During the time of Troubles, for instance, torture cells overflowed. Executions became weekly. Dungeons swelled with dissenters, debtors and scapegoats. The Tsar's men needed control, and fear, they knew, was the cheapest currency. Let's talk about control. Torture wasn't just about inflicting pain, it was about rewriting you. Your name, your memories, your voice. After enough agony you confessed to anything. Treason? Sure. Blasphemy? Why not? Murder? Who cares? The words didn't matter. The confession wasn't for truth, it was for closure, for the record books, for the illusion that justice was done. And when it was over, if you were lucky enough to survive, you weren't released. You were returned. Limp, broken, twitching, thrown back into your box of disease and rot. No one offered sympathy, no one helped. You were a thing now, a warning. And the guards made sure to tell the others, "Speak out, and you'll end like him." Criticism time. If there was ever a moment where civilization declared war on the concept of mercy, this was it. Medieval Russian justice didn't just punish it, erased. It made a performance of pain. It moulded guilt through agony. And all under the banners of God, Tsar, and order. You lie in the dark now, every breath a razor. You taste blood, metal, shame. Ivan whispers prayers for you. You think he's crying, but it might just be the rats chewing nearby. Either way, you close your eyes. Not to sleep, not to hope, just to escape. Because in this place, pain doesn't end, it only changes its rhythm. The bleeding stops eventually. Not because your body is healing, but because it's run out of blood to spare. You wake hours later, maybe days, face down in straw that smells of sour milk and metal, your back raw and stiff, your mind bouncing between memory and nightmare. The others avoid looking at you, not from cruelty, but from instinct. Pain is contagious here. Attention is dangerous. You're not a man anymore. You're a symbol. The living reminder of what happens when someone's name gets whispered too close to a boyar's ear. The worst part? You don't even know what you confess to. Somewhere between the first blow and the fifth, between the screaming and the fainting, your brain detached. You remember sobbing. You remember begging. And then agreeing to something. Anything. The guards shouted questions. Were you part of the rebellion? Did you insult the Metropolitan? Did you speak against the Tsar? And you answered yes. Because there was no right answer. The goal wasn't truth. It was submission. Let's talk about interrogation now, if you can call it that. In theory, it was a process to extract justice. In practice, it was a checklist of pain. Medieval Russian interrogators were rarely trained. They were often ex-soldiers, sadists, or church assistants with little education and too much free time. Their tools? The classics: whips, clamps, fire, but also the improvisations, knotted ropes to twist joints, wedges to split toes, and planks to crush fingers one by one. One documented method involved suspending a prisoner upside down and tickling their feet with hot coals. If they screamed, they were guilty. If they passed out, they were hiding something. And the questions? Often absurd. Do you consort with forest spirits? Did you see devils in the sky? Have you cursed the Tsar's shadow? You say no, they beat you. You say yes. They beat you more, because now you're a witch. The logic spiraled in on itself like a sick joke nobody was allowed to laugh at. You weren't being judged, you were being broken. Then there was the zabitai, the ritual of forgetting. Once a confession was extracted, usually under immense pain, it was written down and read aloud by a clerk who acted like it had been lovingly dictated over tea. The accused confesses to conspiracy, sedition, and ungodly thought. You could barely stand. Your tongue was swollen, your jaw fractured. but the record said you freely admitted guilt. That way, no one could question your punishment. It was all official, clean, in ink. And once you confessed, it didn't end. There was sentencing. You might be executed. You might be exiled. But most likely, you were simply sent back to your cell, not for mercy, but for display. The bruises, the wounds, the misshapen limbs. They were evidence that the system worked. A walking propaganda piece for anyone else with ideas about justice or rebellion. Meanwhile, the church blessed the process. Literally. Priests were often present during interrogations, not to intervene, but to guide the sinner's soul. They sprinkled holy water on torture victims, whispered psalms, and encouraged repentance. One monk wrote that a man who screamed the name of Christ during flogging had shown hopeful signs of redemption. That man died 2 hours later from internal bleeding, but his soul, presumably, was fine. Let's not ignore the bureaucracy. Even torture had paperwork. After a confession, a scribe would copy the statement 3 times, one for the town record, one for the noble's archive, one for the church. It didn't matter if it was written in blood or barely legible. What mattered was that it existed. Proof that order had been restored. That the system caught another sinner. No one checked for bruises. No one investigated the validity. The act of confession itself, no matter how obtained, was the end of the story. And still, people outside believed it. That's the saddest part. The villagers watching the punishment saw justice. They heard the cries and nodded. He must have done something, they'd whisper. They wouldn't hurt an innocent man, because believing otherwise meant facing the truth that it could be them next, that all it took was a neighbour's lie, a bad harvest, or an unpaid tax to land them in your position. Denial was safer. Faith in cruelty felt like order. You begin to understand this, lying half-conscious in the dark. Your ribs don't feel like ribs anymore, more like jelly. Your teeth ache. Your skin pulses like a drum. You try to remember your real crime, the one that got you arrested. Was there one? Maybe it was the muttered complaint at the market. Maybe you were mistaken for someone else. Maybe it was just your turn. In a system built on fear, everyone gets a turn eventually. The guards don't care. They don't even remember your name. You're the one with the bad leg now. They laugh when you stumble. They call you hunchback. They mock your screams. Not because they hate you, but because they need to. Empathy gets you killed here. The moment a guard sees you as human, he becomes vulnerable. So instead, they dehumanize. Mockery is armor. Now for a deeper cut, false confession wasn't just common, it was expected. Studies of Muscovite court archives show staggering rates of identical confessions among unrelated prisoners. Same wording, same phrasing, as if they were reading from a script. Because they were. Scribes had templates. The accused confessed willingly to conspiring against the Tsar and insulting the church. They'd change the names, maybe a detail or two, and reuse the rest. Because after enough pain, everyone says the same things anyway. Criticism? Where to begin? This was justice as puppet theatre, an illusion where law, morality, and religion all pointed fingers at the victim and nodded in satisfaction. No defence, no appeal. Just screams in a room and ink on parchment, and we call it history. We call it law. But it was a machine, a meat grinder of the spirit, greased with blood and sealed with silence. Back in the cell, you can't move. Ivan places a rat carcass near your mouth. Eat, he says, for strength. You don't have the energy to argue. You chew, you gag, you swallow. There's no pride left, only instinct. You've learned the most important lesson. The body will do anything to keep going, even if the soul gave up 2 lashings ago. And as you drift into unconsciousness again, you remember the crowd, their faces, their eyes. Not angry, not afraid, just entertained. You were a show, a warning, a man-shaped object to beat until order was satisfied. Because in this world, justice doesn't wear a blindfold. It wears a grin. Chapter 4. Frozen chains and boiling rage. Punishment by climate, far more consistent torturer. one that didn't take breaks, didn't sleep, didn't care whether you confessed or not. Its name was Winter. The Tsars didn't need elaborate machines of pain in every village. Nature did the work for them. The weather itself became a punishment. And you, poor, broken, nearly naked in your rotting prison hole, were the offering. There's no fireplace in your cell, no insulation. The walls are wood, cracked, soaked with the breath of the damned. Snow falls outside in silent sheets, but you can feel every flake somehow. Cold doesn't stay outside, it creeps. It slithers between the planks, seeps through the straw, settles in your bones. There's no dramatic storm, no thunder. Just the slow, merciless drawdown of your body's ability to resist. At first, you shiver. Muscles tighten, teeth chatter. It almost feels productive. You imagine your body fighting back, warming itself. Then comes the fatigue, the confusion. Your hands stop working. Your skin feels thick, distant, rubbery. You scratch an itch and feel blood. You didn't realize you'd torn your flesh open. That's the worst part. Frostbite numbs you long before it disfigures you. By the time your fingers look like shriveled blackberries, it's too late. Let's describe it clearly. In many dungeons, prisoners were left chained directly to cold stone floors or walls. Chains would freeze to skin. If you shifted too quickly, you tore flesh off with the iron. Guards knew this. Some even enjoyed watching it happen. There's a recorded case of a man in the Scoff region whose feet were frozen to the floorboards overnight. In the morning, when forced to stand, he left skin and tendon behind like old shoes. And if you asked for help, laughed at. One noble's records described winter punishment as God's natural verdict. If you died from cold, you were guilty in his eyes. Convenient theology. No need for trials when hypothermia can judge the soul. The guards played games. They'd pour water on you, just a little, just enough to watch it freeze on your skin. A beard stiff with ice, a shirt turned to armour. You tried to scrape it off, but your fingers didn't bend anymore. Then they'd pour more. You were an Iceman now. A statue. The pain wasn't sharp. It was total. Like being buried in a snowdrift of needles. Meanwhile outside, the countryside froze too. Entire rivers hardened. Wolves wandered closer to towns, hungry, desperate. But at least the peasants had fires. A hut. A blanket. You had the company of other prisoners turning blue beside you. You didn't know their names anymore. Just the shapes they took in the dark, like ghosts piled in corners. You might think the guards had mercy during winter, that they understood the threat. Some did, briefly. But more often, they saw cold as a useful tool. Why waste strength beating a man when you can let the wind do it? Why tie him to a post when you can just strip him, pour a bucket, and watch the frost make art out of suffering? Sometimes they'd toss you outside. Just for an hour, they said. A test. To remind you who owns the air. You'd be thrown into a pit, naked or close to it, with snow up to your chest. Your breath would burn. Your eyes would sting. You'd try to curl into yourself, but chains don't let you curl. One prisoner reportedly begged for death after only 30 minutes. They left him there for 2 hours. When they brought him back in, he was blind. Ice had taken his vision. The guards named him White Eyes. They thought it was funny. Let's get technical. Russia in the medieval era didn't just get cold, it got weapon-grade cold. -30°C was common. Blizzards could last days. And prisons weren't built for weather. They were built to forget people. No insulation, no repairs, no heating, no bedding beyond damp straw. There are reports of prisoners sleeping stacked like cordwood just to share body heat. It wasn't camaraderie, it was survival. And even then, they froze. Water, when given, came as ice. You had to suck it slowly, trying not to crack your teeth. Food, if it came at all, was half-frozen porridge. You couldn't feel the spoon. You just hoped the lump you bit into wasn't spoiled meat or rat. Sometimes it was. You didn't care. Critics might ask, why didn't they just revolt? Tear the place down, attack the guards, run. The answer is simple, the cold. It didn't just break bodies, it broke will. When your limbs barely move and your brain fogs with every breath, rebellion becomes a dream you can't hold on to. The guards knew that. Winter was the leash, frost was the prison. And still, the bureaucracy ticked on. Clerks recorded deaths as natural causes. No mention of exposure. No mention of blue lips or frozen lungs. Just expired. Some even blamed the prisoners. Failed to survive incarceration. As if that was a lack of discipline, not a death sentence signed by weather and neglect. There's one story, barely a paragraph in an old court scroll about a man chained in an outside stockade during winter for stealing a loaf of bread. He was found frozen solid, arms extended, mouth open. They didn't move him for 3 days. People walked past, some prayed, others spat. When they finally took him down, his arms broke off at the elbow. They'd turned brittle. That was punishment. That was justice. That was Russia. Back in your cell, the straw is frozen to the floor. You've urinated in your sleep again. No shame left. The warmth lasts 30 seconds, then becomes an icy patch beneath you. You don't bother moving. Moving takes energy. Energy takes food. Food takes mercy. Ivan speaks again. His voice is cracked like dry bark. I used to have a goat, he says. She was warm. He smiles. You don't reply. You can't. Your jaw is locked. Your tongue sluggish. Your thoughts come slowly now, as if they have to thaw before arriving. And yet, somehow, you're still alive. Not because you're strong, but because life is stubborn. It clings, even when logic says it shouldn't. You're not surviving winter. Winter is tolerating you. Criticism? Let's be fair, this wasn't unique to Russia. Many medieval societies were brutal. But few weaponized nature itself with such ruthless indifference. Cold here wasn't just a background condition, it was a participant in justice, a co-warden, a collaborator in suffering. And while nobles huddled beside hearths, peasants died outside, and prisoners were forgotten long before they froze, so you curl tighter, breathe shallow, wait for morning, or whatever passes for it down here. There's no sunrise in this dungeon, just a slightly lighter shade of dark. And if you survive the night, congratulations. You've earned another day of cold. You'd be forgiven for thinking winter was the worst it could get. The biting winds, the frostbitten feet, the icicles forming in your beard like death's jewelry, all of it seemed like the final word on suffering. But then comes summer. And somehow, it's worse. Because medieval Russian dungeons weren't designed for any climate, let alone one where the air itself feels like a wet towel soaked in human rot. If winter punishes through stillness, summer punishes through decay. You don't freeze now, you ferment. It starts with the smell. In the cold, everything was dulled. The stench, though unbearable, at least froze into silence. Now it rises, blooms, blossoms like something proud. The stink of waste, sweat, blood and corpses becomes a living thing. It clings to your hair, your mouth, the walls. The straw in the corners is soaked, not just with bodily fluids, but with heat. It radiates upward. There is no breeze, no air movement. Just a thick, steaming soup of bacteria swirling from corner to corner like invisible poison. The flies return first. They breed in the latrine hole and swarm the bread bucket before you can crawl to it. You swat them away, but your arms are too weak. They win. Then come the maggots, returning for the decomposing spots in the straw, left behind by those who didn't last the winter. The guards haven't removed every corpse. Some were buried under hay. You think you're sleeping next to a sack of mouldy linen until it moves. Your body doesn't handle this kind of heat anymore. It swells. Your skin is red, then purple, then blistered. The sores that froze last month now weep in the heat. Your sweat has nowhere to go. It just pools and rolls over cracked flesh. And God help you if you have a wound. It bubbles. You can feel the infection spreading. The pus turns green. The rats lick it. You let them. It's cooling. The guards know the heat kills. They count on it. They slide the hatch shut tighter so no breeze slips through. The goal isn't to ventilate, it's to cook. You're slow roasted over weeks. a meat bag marinated in shame. You hear your cellmates mutter deliriously. One calls out to a mother long dead. Another strips naked and lies in the corner, claiming he's bathing in a river. You stare at the ceiling and wonder how long until it collapses, not from rain, but from accumulated screams pressing upward. You used to dread being taken outside. Now you beg for it. Just for the sun, even if it blinds you. Just for the wind, even if it comes with beatings. But they don't let you out anymore, not unless you're being punished or buried. The heat is your new guard. It keeps you weak, keeps you compliant. No one starts riots when their organs are slowly boiling inside them. Let's get clinical for a moment. The medieval Russian summer often brought stagnant weather conditions, no airflow, high humidity. Dungeons became breeding grounds for dysentery, typhus, lice-borne fevers, and rotting diseases that had no names, only symptoms: vomiting, delirium, black tongues. The Orthodox Church called these outbreaks divine punishment. The prisoners called it Tuesday. Your mouth is a desert now. Your tongue cracks when you speak. You stopped forming complete sentences days ago. Even Ivan, your closest neighbour in suffering, has gone silent. He stares at the wall, lips moving, eyes unfocused. His skin is yellow. His breath smells like spoiled milk. You think he might be dying, or already dead. You nudge him once, gently. He swats you away. That's good. Means there's still something human in there. Let's talk anger. Because yes, beneath the suffering, beneath the hunger and pain, there is rage. Boiling, bubbling, directionless rage. Not at the guards, not even at the Tsar or God. It's more primal. Anger at the world. At the soil that grows nothing but sorrow. At the fact that you still wake up, day after day, to pain that hasn't even bothered changing shape. And that rage, it's dangerous. Not because it leads to revolution, you're too weak for that. No, it's dangerous because it turns inward. You begin to hate yourself, for surviving, for enduring, for adapting to hell instead of resisting it. You once heard that summer brings rebirth, new crops, blossoming fields. That was the countryside. Out there, peasants gather around rivers and wash the season's sins away in festival waters. They drink, they laugh, they celebrate the cycle. You remember hearing songs once, drums, flutes, women in wreaths of flowers dancing barefoot. And now, you lie in a box made of misery, sweating through your scabs, wondering if those people even exist, or if they were just ghosts you invented to keep your heart beating. Criticism? Let's be generous. The state probably didn't intend for the prisons to be death ovens. That would have required foresight. They simply didn't care. Maintenance, ventilation, design, these were luxuries. And you weren't a person who deserved luxuries. You were a placeholder, a mouth to shut, a body to disappear. So the cells rotted, the roofs collapsed, the straw blackened with generations of sorrow, and no one outside noticed. Or worse, they did notice, and they turned away. And still, somehow, the church found comfort. Priests preached about patience, about humility in suffering. They said Christ suffered too, that your wounds brought you closer to salvation. Easy words for men in robes standing outside. They never lay face down in boiling straw with their back peeling like bark. They never had to pray for a breeze to blow away the stink of 6 rotting men. Back in the cell, the air shimmers now. Heatstroke sets in. One prisoner begins laughing, loudly, uncontrollably. The guards don't intervene. Laughter is a sign the brain is breaking, and they consider that justice served. Another man claws at the wall, muttering that there's a lake behind it. He dies 3 hours later, face pressed to the timber, smiling. You survive. Not from strength, not from faith, from some horrible animal instinct that refuses to give in. You sip melted rat blood. You eat mouldy crusts. You steal scraps from the dead. You sleep only when your mind shuts down. And when you wake, covered in sweat and lice, you don't scream. Screaming takes air, and so the rage continues, boiling just under the skin. Because you know somewhere in your bones that the weather isn't just punishment, it's the justice system itself. Russia doesn't need order. It has nature. And nature doesn't need a reason. Chapter 5. A meal fit for a dog. If you're lucky, hunger, when it starts, is loud. It gnaws. It growls. It demands attention like a spoiled child. But in the dungeons of medieval Russia, hunger learns patience. It waits. It grows quiet. It becomes something deeper, something colder. A background noise that never leaves. You don't remember your last proper meal. You remember textures, the crust of stale bread, the slickness of boiled cabbage, the sharp crunch of something that was probably bone. Meals aren't measured by nutrition anymore. They're measured by how long they keep you from collapsing. Food in the Russian prison system of the medieval era was never a right. It was a tool, a leash, a mood swing away from being withheld entirely. The state didn't budget meals for prisoners. That would imply organisation. Instead, feeding was a personal responsibility, yours or your family's. No relatives, no food. Poor relatives, thin soup, dead relatives, dead you. The prison might provide something once a day, twice if you were in a larger town, but that something was closer to sludge than sustenance. Let's talk about Balanda, the infamous prison soup. Imagine a bucket of lukewarm water, dyed grey by a handful of barley or buckwheat, maybe a turnip peel, maybe a fleck of meat if the cook was distracted. No seasoning, no oil, no love. Just water, fibre and despair. The guards ladle it into dented bowls, or into your hands if you don't have one. You slurp it before it cools, because it always cools fast in the dungeon's damp chill. Then you sit, and you wait. For what? You're not sure. Maybe for the next bowl, maybe for the next hallucination. On a good day, they bring bread. Not fresh bread, not soft bread. This is kyselovka, black rye hardened to the consistency of stone. You break it against the wall. You suck on it until it softens. If your teeth crack, that's just another problem. Prisoners often lost molars to stale crusts. Some didn't bother chewing at all. They just held the bread in their mouths for hours, letting saliva do what chewing couldn't. You learned early on to hide scraps, behind a plank, under a mat of hair. Inside your clothes, if you still had any. The guards searched sometimes, not often, but when they did, they took everything. Unauthorized possession of state property, they'd say with a smirk. One time, Ivan hid a crust in his boot. They found it. They made him eat it whole, mould, dirt, leather scrap and all, then beat him when he vomited. Wasteful, they said. Ungrateful. Let's get honest, most of your meals aren't meant to nourish. They're meant to prolong suffering just enough. Keep you conscious. Keep you crawl capable. The dungeon isn't interested in corpses. They're messy. They rot too quickly in summer and freeze too solid in winter. A living skeleton, though, that's manageable. That's a warning. Sometimes you get lucky, not by design, but by chaos. A rat dies near your corner. You roast it over a candle flame. Singed fur, blackened meat, but it's food. Ivan once caught a pigeon that flew too close to the bars. We shared it, 2 bites each. The bones we boiled in water for a day. That broth tasted like heaven, or at least like not dying. There's another option, of course. One we don't like to talk about. Cannibalism isn't common, but it happens. It's whispered about. A man who cut from the dead when no one was looking. A woman who kept a finger in her garment like a sacred relic. You judge, but not too harshly. Hunger is holy in its cruelty. It doesn't ask, it commands. And once it speaks loudly enough, even morals begin to sound like noise. Occasionally the guards feed, you for sport. They throw scraps through the hatch. Let the prisoners fight. A bone with gristle, a chunk of pig fat. One time, a half-rotten apple. You fought Ivan for that one, you didn't mean to. But when your vision narrowed and your teeth found his wrist, you knew hunger had taken over. Later, you apologized. He didn't answer, just sucked the bite on his arm like it was dessert. Let's go macro. There's a reason food scarcity worked so well as control. In a time without refrigeration, preservation, or logistics, food was power. And famine wasn't rare, it was a recurring visitor. Russia saw famines in the 13th, 14th, 15th centuries, wiping out entire districts. When the countryside starved, prisoners weren't even considered. The record keepers would simply note, sustenance disrupted. No specifics, no faces. You could die with a dozen others and be listed as removed. That's it. Sometimes the prison cook was a prisoner himself, given scraps from the market. Old meat, broken eggs, maggoty cheese. He'd stir it all together and call it stew. You'd eat it. Then you'd spend the night crouched over the pit, expelling it as fast as you took it in. Food wasn't survival. It was a gamble. You rolled your guts every time you swallowed. And yet, despite it all, you dream about meals. You don't dream of escape, or family, or sun. You dream of porridge, of dumplings, of a hot bowl of borscht, thick with cabbage and garlic. You imagine the steam, the warmth, the weight in your stomach. You cry when you wake up, not because it's gone, but because it was never real. Let's not forget the hierarchy. Some prisoners got more, bribed guards, had outside families delivering food. These were the elites of the dungeon, the ones with salt. Yes, salt was a luxury. If you had it, you could trade for anything. An extra sip of water, a blanket, an hour without chains. Salt was power, and power meant calories. You hated them, of course, but you also huddled near them when rats moved through the straw, because the ones who ate well still had strength, and strength meant survival. Criticism? Oh, where to begin? Feeding prisoners was never seen as an obligation, not by the state, not by the church. Starvation was considered a moral purifier. He who suffers hunger's closer to God, one bishop wrote. Easy to say from behind a feast. In truth, starvation was lazy punishment. It cost nothing. It required no trial, no executioner, no tools. Just absence, just silence, just waiting. And so you wait. Stomach growling, mouth dry, heart slowing. Ivan finally eats something today. Paper, chewed from a holy pamphlet dropped by a passing priest. You try to chew it too. It's bitter. You swallow anyway. And the day ends with no dinner. The guard forgot. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe this is the new routine. You whisper to yourself about potatoes. Imagine their warmth. You cry again, but softly. You don't want the others to know. Because tomorrow, if food comes, you might have to fight for it. And crying is for the weak. The strange thing about hunger is that it begins as a thief and ends as a king. It steals your focus first, then your strength, then your memory. But once it's taken everything else, it doesn't leave. It rules. It becomes your clock, your compass, your only god. You stop counting days by sunrise and start measuring time by the distance between meals, if they can even be called that. In this world, you don't live day by day. You live crust by crust. By now, your body is eating itself, not metaphorically. Literally, muscle turns to energy, then fat. Then the body cannibalizes its organs. You've dropped weight quickly, too quickly. Your ribs fan across your chest like broken piano keys. Your spine juts out with every breath. Your thighs are thin enough to wrap one hand around. You no longer defecate regularly, and when you do, it's little more than black slime. The smell alone tells you your stomach lining is on its last legs. But in here, that doesn't make you special. That makes you average. Everyone looks like this. Hollowed, yellow-eyed, knees trembling from the effort of standing. And that's the trick of it. When everyone is starving, there is no pity. Just competition. A man crying over hunger is a man wasting energy. You learn to ignore his sobs. You stare at the bucket door. Always. Because that bucket means food. And food means everything. There's a rhythm to it now. A sound you've memorized. The scraping of a boot, the creak of the wooden hatch, the metal clang of something dropped. Sometimes it's the soup bucket. Sometimes it's the waste pail. Sometimes it's nothing at all, just a tease. The guards know exactly what they're doing. They enjoy it. They shake a bowl just out of reach, or pretend to drop it, then kick it across the floor and laugh as grown men crawl on hands and knees through muck to fight over a handful of porridge that probably has a dead fly in it. That's when you understand the real economy of the dungeon. Food is currency, not kindness, not charity, it's power. And those who control the crumbs control the cell. There's always one. The prisoner with a little more. Maybe he has a wife who sneaks bread in. Maybe he bribed a guard once and now they toss him scraps. He guards them jealously. He's not a king. Kings give out bread. He's a broker, a miser. He'll trade you a crust for your boots or a sip of water for your dignity, and you'll give it. Because starving men are never proud. They are only desperate. Let's give him a name. You know him as Oleg. His jaw is still strong, his voice still firm. His clothes are only partially torn. You hate him, but you orbit him. He has leverage. Guards slip him extra slices. Why? Because he entertains them. He sings. He rats out the troublemakers. He laughs at their jokes. And in return, they let him survive. In this world, being useful to cruelty is a kind of wisdom. Oleg doesn't eat his crusts all at once. He savours them, holds them in his sleeve, dips them in water to soften. He eats slowly, knowing the rest of you are watching, mouths twitching, fists clenched. He stares at you while he chews. That's the worst part, the performance. You want to scream at him. Want to lunge. But you don't, because if you do, he'll tell the guards you stole from him, and you'll be dragged out for punishment. For stealing a morsel he never even touched. You once asked him, just once, if he could share, just a corner, a bite. He said yes, then dropped it in the latrine hole. Told you to go fetch it. Laughed for 20 minutes. You didn't go after it, but you thought about it. That scared you more than anything. Let's not pretend this is just individual cruelty. The system encouraged it. Russian prison policy at the time often relied on voluntary provisioning, meaning prisoners had to obtain their own food or depend on family donations. Guards were underpaid and underregulated. So they extorted prisoners, demanded bribes, or skimmed off what little food was sent in. One court record describes a guard who collected bacon fees, a chunk of every smoked meat parcel delivered by families. If the prisoner's family refused, the guard fed the entire thing to his dog in front of them. And when famine struck, and famine always struck, guards began selling food inside the dungeons at inflated rates. A mouldy apple cost a month's wages. A single boiled egg was considered wealth. If you had anything left to trade, a ring, a button, even sexual favours, you did. And when you ran out, you begged. And when begging stopped working, you died. Then came the hunger madness. It doesn't hit all at once. First, you feel lighter, as if your bones have started floating. Then comes the shaking. You drop things. You speak nonsense. You forget your own name. Ivan went through this 2 days ago. He tried to eat his own sleeve. When it didn't work, he clawed at his neck, swearing there were bugs crawling under the skin. He said they whispered. The others moved away. No one helped. Madness was contagious. The priest came once this week, stood by the bars, tossed in a small loaf, said a prayer, walked away. Oleg caught the loaf mid-air, offered it to a woman missing half her teeth in exchange for something unspeakable. She agreed. You watched. You looked away. You're not sure which moment was worse. Criticism. It's easy to condemn Oleg, to call him a monster. But he's a product of a system that demanded selfishness. There were no rules here, no fairness, only appetite, and the authorities knew it. They wanted it this way. Starving people don't rebel. They scrape. They snitch. They obey. The real cruelty wasn't what the guards did. It was what they didn't do. They let hunger devour your sense of self, then blamed you when you became something unrecognizable. Outside, the church held feasts, harvest festivals, Thanksgivings. They said prayers for the poor, never mentioning the incarcerated. To them, you were already gone, a lost soul, your punishment divine, your stomach a symbol of sin. They wrote hymns about spiritual hunger while you ate cockroaches to stay upright. And still, the bucket comes. Once a day, sometimes twice. You wait. You sniff, you pray, not to God anymore, to the man holding the ladle. He's your new deity, he controls your fate. And when he laughs, you laugh too, because maybe that earns you one more spoonful. Maybe it means not starving tonight. You close your eyes. Dream of bread, of butter, of berries. You remember the taste of milk, the sound of chewing without shame. Then you wake up. A rat is sniffing your face. You wonder if it's your turn to be eaten. Chapter 6. The guard is the devil. Somewhere along the line, you stop fearing the chains. You stop fearing the hunger. You even stop fearing death. What you start fearing, truly, instinctively, irreversibly, is the sound of boots. The rhythmic, casual stomp of leather on stone. The too cheerful jingle of keys. The momentary hush that falls across the cell when the latch lifts, when everyone holds their breath like prey scenting the wolf. Because in medieval Russia, the guard wasn't just an authority figure. He was your god, your executioner, your torturer, your tormentor, and, on rare and cruel occasions, your only source of mercy. If hell had a doorman, it would be him. Let's be clear, not all guards were monsters. Some were worse. Monsters at least follow a logic, a hunger. But guards followed boredom, and boredom is dangerous in a place built on silence, filth, and unpunished power. They had no training beyond swinging a club and sneering through their teeth. Many were veterans of old skirmishes, paid in vodka and scraps of land, too brutal for regular soldiering and too stupid for farming. Their post at the dungeon wasn't a punishment, it was a reward, a license to indulge. They came in shifts, but it hardly mattered. The morning guard was angry to be awake. The night guard was drunk. The midday one simply hated you because you were breathing. You'd be surprised how often beatings began that way, because someone made a noise, or didn't, or looked wrong, or smelled too badly even by dungeon standards. They'd unlock the door with ceremony, dragging the iron just long enough to make your heart race. Sometimes they'd wait behind it, silent, letting your panic build like steam in a closed pot. Then they'd burst in, kick a man in the ribs, and leave without a word. No explanation, no justice, just disruption, like a god throwing a lightning bolt for fun. You learned not to make eye contact. That was rule 1. Never look a guard in the eye unless you were begging, and even then you did it with your head bowed. Eye contact invited challenge, and challenge meant violence. They could drag you out, beat you until your breath rattled, then dump you back half-conscious, and no one would intervene. You could scream, you could bleed, you could lose teeth. They might even brag about it at the tavern later. Knock the insolence out of the rat, they'd say. He squealed like a pig, must have been guilty. They had nicknames for everyone, not affectionate ones. They called Ivan Grub, called you Worm, called the old woman in the corner Piglet. They'd say it sweetly, mockingly as they passed. How's Piglet today? Still leaking blood from her leg? They joked about infection like it was a dinner topic. Once, they bet how long it would take for a man's wound to turn gangrenous. They were wrong by a day. He died that night. They laughed. They were drunk. And they laughed. The guards controlled everything, not just food, not just punishment, everything. Water? They decided if you got a sip. Blankets? They could give them, or take them, or urinate on them. Medicine? There wasn't any, but if there were, they'd sell it to the highest bidder. Messages to family? Only if they liked you, or if you paid, or if your sister was pretty. They were kings without crowns, judges without trials. And what made it worse? They enjoyed it. Sometimes they played games, real games. They'd force prisoners to fight over scraps. Tell you they'd reward the winner, then beat both when it was done. Or they'd promise freedom. Confess, and you'll walk out. So you confessed. You lied. You begged. And then they laughed and said, "We meant we'll carry you out." And they did, in a sack. The dungeon became a theatre. They were the audience. Your pain was the act. You learned to perform, to flinch just right, to cry on cue. because sometimes that amused them, and if they were amused they might spare you or toss you a bone, literally. Once they fed a prisoner. A pig bone dipped in urine told him it was holy food. He wept while eating it, said it tasted like salvation. And still the church said nothing. The priests walked the corridors in silence, swinging incense over the heads of monsters. Sometimes they offered sermons to the guards. "Mercy is the Lord's way," they'd say. The guards nodded, then beat a man to death the same evening for spitting too loudly. It wasn't hypocrisy, it was ritual. Let's speak plainly, there were no rules. There was no oversight. No one asked questions. A guard could murder a prisoner, toss the body in a trench behind the stockade, write "died of fever" in the record, and go on with his day. The only risk he faced was paperwork. Not punishment, just paperwork. There was a system, of course. Every prison has one. But in Russia, the hierarchy was designed to fail, to forget. The local boyar was too busy collecting taxes. The state inspector came once a year, if that. The dungeon was buried physically and bureaucratically. If complaints rose, they vanished in translation. If evidence was found, it disappeared. Sometimes literally. Burned, buried, silenced. One day a prisoner tried to rebel, not loudly, just refused to kneel when the guard passed. That was all. He was dragged out, not beaten, stripped, tied, left outside overnight during frost. The next morning he was brought back in, naked, blue, shaking. No one said anything. He crawled to the corner, curled into himself, and began whispering in Latin. He didn't know Latin, he'd never learned it. The guards called it madness, called it music. Criticism? You want it? Fine. This wasn't justice. This wasn't even sadism. This was neglect weaponized. Cruelty institutionalized. When you let broken men guard the condemned and give them nothing but power and rot, they don't enforce law. They become gods of their own little underworld, and everyone inside suffers for it. The worst part? You start to understand them. Not sympathize, just understand. You see how power corrupts, how boredom breeds violence, how men, when left unchecked, stop seeing others as people. The guard wasn't born a devil. He was made, forged in war, tempered in vodka, sharpened in filth, and handed a key to a room full of forgotten souls. Now you lie awake, listening, waiting. The bootsteps return, closer, louder. The latch clicks. Ivan shivers beside you. You don't breathe, don't blink. You pray not to be spared, but to be forgotten, because mercy doesn't live here, and the devil holds the keys. They say power corrupts, but that's only half the story. Power doesn't just rot the soul, it empties it out and fills it with noise. In the medieval Russian dungeon, that noise echoed in every blow, every insult, every joke whispered between guards as a prisoner whimpered on the floor. By now, you've learned not to mistake your tormentor for a man. Here's something else entirely, a creature hollowed by authority and fed by your degradation. The longer you live, the clearer it becomes. The guard isn't just your jailer, he's a reflection of what happens when cruelty becomes a career path. There was a time when you thought the guards were tools of a bad system, men forced to do terrible things. That illusion is gone now. You've seen too much, heard too much. The smirk on their faces as they step on the weak, the performance of power, the rhythm to their brutality. It's not spontaneous, it's rehearsed, a ritual. Pain is their liturgy, suffering their favourite hymn. Some guards, like the one they call Pyotr the Red, have made violence into a form of artistry. He doesn't beat to punish, he beats to impress, to test new angles, to hear new sounds. Once he broke a man's nose with the handle of a ladle, then mocked him for bleeding into the soup bucket. That day no one ate. Not because of the blood, but because Pyotr drank it as a dare. Everyone laughed, even the priest standing near the door. Maybe he thought it was metaphor. Others are quieter, more methodical. The ones who never speak above a whisper, who visit at night, who drag prisoners out one at a time and bring them back changed. You never ask what happens. The body speaks for itself, bruises in places no blow should land, a silence that hangs too long in the air, an emptiness behind the eyes that never quite leaves. One boy came back that way, just a boy. 15, maybe 16. Accused of theft. He didn't speak again for weeks. One night he chewed his fingers down to the bone. It's not just violence, it's humiliation. Guards don't just want you broken, they want you small, contorted, afraid to blink. They urinate in your food, spit in your water, force you to sing when you can barely breathe. Piotr once made 2 grown men dance for scraps, kicking them when they moved too slowly, laughing like a drunk noble at a tavern puppet show. When one of them collapsed, he beat the other for losing the rhythm. And somehow all of it is allowed, encouraged even. Because these dungeons are buried not only underground, but beneath layers of indifference. The boyars don't care. The Tsar's men look away. The church offers blessings, but not protection. The guards are the system now, judge, jury, executioner and jester. They don't need orders, just space. And the dungeon gives them plenty. But something has shifted lately, you've noticed it. A tremor in their confidence. A wildness in their eyes. It's not just the prisoners breaking, it's the guards. Too many nights in the dark, too many screams. Some of them are cracking. One was caught whispering apologies to a dead man. Another began wearing bones around his neck, fingertips strung on twine like charms. He said they protected him from the rot. The others laughed, but not as loudly as before. There's a sickness here, deeper than infection. It's in the air. The mold, the blood, the cycles of cruelty. They infect everyone. You saw one guard puke after beating a man. Not from guilt, but from the smell. He beat him again afterward, harder, blaming him for it. Another tried to light incense inside the cell. Thought it would drive out the devils. It just made the smoke thicker. You coughed until your throat bled. He said it was a cleansing. One night, a new guard arrived, young, clean hands, nervous eyes. He didn't hit anyone. He watched, quiet. You wanted to believe he was different. He wasn't. By the 3rd night, he laughed when Piotr kicked a woman unconscious. By the 5th, he was doing the kicking. By the 7th, he stopped flinching when bones cracked. The dungeon eats its newcomers. Not slowly. Immediately. Let's talk process. Guards rotated shifts, but never for long. They couldn't. The violence had to continue uninterrupted. Morning rounds, midday inspections, night interrogations, each with its own flavour. Some used dogs. Others used branding irons. Some favoured silence, just standing at the cell door for hours, staring, breathing, waiting. Psychological torture sharpened like a knife. And here's the kicker. Most of these guards were once peasants. Or soldiers. Men who knew suffering. Who knew hunger. And still, when given the chance, they chose to become the thing they feared. Because being feared in this world was the only way to feel alive. They weren't just surviving, they were rising. And they needed someone under their heel to prove it. Criticism? This isn't a few bad apples. This is the tree, the soil, the roots, the entire garden. When power is unchecked, when violence is normalized, when pity is punished and cruelty praised, what grows isn't justice. It's a plague. And everyone inside these walls is infected. Guards, prisoners, even you. Yes, you. You've thought about revenge. You've dreamed of wrapping your hands around Piotr's throat, squeezing until the laughter stops. You fantasize about it while chewing mouldy crusts. But you know it won't happen. You're too weak, too hungry, too tired. The rage keeps you warm, but it won't save you. Ivan, barely conscious beside you, mumbles something. You lean in. He's dreaming again. Something about flowers, about spring. You envy him. You haven't dreamed in days. Just darkness, just boots, just the door opening again. And so you close your eyes. Not to sleep, but to disappear. To escape into the thin, crumbling parts of yourself that the guards haven't crushed yet. You don't pray anymore. You just wait. For the boots, for the laugh, for the next ritual. Because you know what's coming. The devil doesn't rest. And he's wearing a uniform. Chapter 7. Chains of Power. Political prisoners and royal rage. There is a special kind of prisoner in these walls. He doesn't arrive in rags. He doesn't steal bread from rats or beg guards for mercy. He arrives quiet, pale, well-dressed. His cuffs still intact, his hair still combed. He's not a thief or a murderer or some peasant who screamed too loudly at tax collectors. No, he's something worse, a threat to power. You learn quickly that in medieval Russia, speaking the wrong words in the wrong ear could get you tied up beside the worst of society. And the irony? You didn't have to be right. You just had to be remembered. Political prisoners come with no crime, not a real one. Their only sin is being in proximity to someone powerful enough to be paranoid, a rival's cousin, a noble's outspoken scribe, a priest who quoted the Bible too honestly, the son of a man who insulted a boyar in a tavern 15 winters ago. Guilt here isn't a verdict, it's a vapour. It floats. It sticks. It poisons. And when it finds you, no armour of virtue will save you. You remember when the latest one arrived. Alexander, they called him. Slim, blue-eyed, wore a fur-trimmed coat too fine for this place. The guards didn't beat him at first. They didn't need to. The message was clear. We know who you are, and we're going to enjoy what comes next. They didn't strip him, not all at once. They let him wear his fine clothes until they reeked, until they hung from his bony shoulders like a dead animal, until the stink of the dungeon overpowered the scent of whatever wealth once followed him. He was different from the rest of us. Didn't curse, didn't cry, didn't ask questions, just sat. Thinking. Planning, maybe. The guards hated that. They prefer screams to silence. So they started inventing games. They'd accuse him of praying for treason, of blinking too slowly, of stealing soup when none was served. Every day was another excuse to twist the screws tighter. Not for information. Just to make a point, no matter how important you once were, in here you are nothing. Let's step back a moment. In Tsar-era Russia, especially under Ivan the Terrible, the line between political dissent and mortal sin was a hair's width. Speak too loudly about grain shortages? Sedition. Refuse to kneel before a lesser noble? Conspiracy. Publish a psalm with one word altered? Heresy. There was no room for nuance, and once accused, your status meant nothing. Some of the highest-ranking boyars in Muscovy found themselves rotting underground, forgotten by the same bureaucrats who toasted them a season earlier. The cruelest part? Political prisoners weren't just buried, they were erased. Names scrubbed from records, family lines struck out, lands confiscated, children sent to monasteries, spouses forced into remarriage or silence. It wasn't just a punishment, it was obliteration. And if you survived, if you crawled back to the surface one day with breath in your lungs, you found your entire life gone. No home, no wealth, no friends. Just a story that no one dared tell. Alexander spoke once late one night, voice like gravel, like someone unused to their own sound. He said, "My brother will find me." Then he smiled. It wasn't hope, it was delusion. Because we all knew, once you're in here, you don't get found. You get forgotten. That's the system. It's not designed to hold justice. It's designed to digest you. Sometimes they interrogated him, not for secrets, but for amusement. They'd ask questions like, "Did you write the letter to Poland, or are you planning to poison the patriarch?" He'd say no. They'd nod. Then punch him anyway. Tie him down. Drown him in cold water. Hold candles to his feet, nothing elaborate, just routine brutality. He'd return shivering, bleeding, lips split and purple, and he'd sit again, thinking. We asked him once why he didn't scream. He said, "They want my fear. I won't give them anything they want." Admirable, yes, also stupid, because pain doesn't need permission. It doesn't care about pride. By the third week, Alexander was begging for medicine, for water, for death. The guards called that progress. And yet, political prisoners had privileges, of a sort. Not mercy, never that. But attention. When the guards beat us, they were careless. When they beat him, it was art. Every mark was placed with precision, each bruise a message. This is what happens to thinkers. The cruelty was more ceremonial. The church even sent a priest, not to comfort him, to remind him that rebellion was a sin. They said he could cleanse himself through confession. He said he didn't need cleansing. They took a tooth that night. Alexander wasn't the only one. Over time, more arrived. Quiet men, poets, monks, scholars. Even a woman once, her crime, organising a group of peasant wives to pray together without approval. She lasted 2 weeks before vanishing. No one spoke of her again. It was safer that way. Criticism. Here's the deepest cut. The system didn't need these people to be guilty. It preferred them innocent. Guilt requires proof. Innocence only requires a grudge. And in Russia's tangled web of power, a grudge was as common as snow. You could fall out of favour before the soup cooled on your table. The only insurance policy was invisibility. And if you were unlucky enough to stand out, welcome to the cell. Alexander died in his sleep. Heart gave out, or maybe poison, we never knew. The guards removed him without ceremony, dumped the body in a pit behind the stockade. The rats mourned him more than the record books. But we remember, not out of friendship, just recognition. He was proof that none of us were safe, that even the highborn bleed in the dark. The next day the guards joked. Another traitor down, they said. The Tsar sleeps peacefully tonight. We said nothing, smiled faintly, played our roles, because even rage has rules in here. And rule 1, don't let them see it. You sit now in your corner, hunger gnawing, bones aching. You watch a new man enter the cell. Clean hands, soft face, fine coat. You don't ask his name. You already know his story. Just another soul swallowed by royal rage. Alexander's death didn't shake the guards. It amused them. One fewer mouth to feed, one more story to chuckle over at shift change. "Did you see the way he twitched?" one asked, mimicking the final spasms. They laughed. Not cruel laughter. Casual. The kind that bubbles out when nothing matters anymore. It's the tone that haunted you more than the torture, the normalization of ruin. Because in here, a death isn't a tragedy. It's a shift in room temperature. His place in the corner was taken by morning. The straw hadn't even cooled. A new man was thrown in, old robes, bald head, fingers ink-stained even in filth. You guessed he was a scribe. Maybe a clerk. Maybe something worse in the state's eyes, someone who knew things. That was the irony of the dungeon. The more educated you were, the more dangerous they said you were. Literacy was a threat. Ideas were infection. And in a state built on paranoia, even your handwriting could hang you. The new man, Boris, he whispered eventually, didn't speak much, but his eyes moved constantly, tracking the guards, watching patterns. When he did speak, it was in proverbs. A fly in the Tsar's soup will be whipped before the cook. It took you a few hours to realize he wasn't mad. He was quoting secret phrases from banned texts. He knew things. And that meant he wouldn't last. The dungeon was full of men like him. Or it had been, before they rotted. The system had a use for these minds, of course, not as thinkers, but as puppets. A confession from a political prisoner wasn't just about guilt. It was about theatre. Say you planned a rebellion. Say you met with foreigners. Say you cursed the patriarch. And when they said it, under duress, under the knife, under weeks of starvation, it was copied, stamped, read aloud in court, and used to justify more arrests. One lie built another. One broken body helped break 10 more. You saw this firsthand. Once, they took Boris for questioning, not to extract facts, to extract narratives. They told him what he had done, wrote the script. His only job was to perform. You delivered treasonous letters. You plotted with Lithuanians. You dreamt of the Tsar's death. He said no. So they pulled fingernails. He said no. They burned his feet. He said no. They brought in another man, half dead, eyes rolled back, who confirmed Boris's guilt. "He told me everything," the man muttered, voice like gravel. You recognized him. He confessed to 3 conspiracies last week, could barely remember his own name. Now he was the state's evidence. And Boris? He laughed, then he screamed, then he confessed. The guards returned him shattered. His hands were ruined, burned, fingers fused. He lay beside you, trembling, whispering. They made me sign with a coal stub. I couldn't hold it. They moved my hand for me. The next day, his name appeared in the official record. Traitor Boris admits to sedition and sorcery. Justice to be served. It would be, in slow, cold installments. Outside the dungeon, his confession changed lives. His students were arrested, his writings burned. A local priest who once quoted him during a sermon was publicly flogged. The lie became a storm, and the state, ever efficient, used the debris to build new walls, new accusations, new graves. Let's step back. In medieval Russia, truth was not a legal category, it was a convenience. The more dramatic the story, the more useful it was. A peasant uprising? Too disorganized. But a conspiracy led by an educated man? Perfect. A reason to crush dissent. A reason to warn others. And best of all, it looked official. Confession, witness, seal, justice. That's why political prisoners were so valuable. They provided legitimacy. No one cared that it was carved from their backs. The state needed scripts, and the dungeon provided actors. Voluntary or not, alive or not, you remember the worst case. A nobleman old, blind in one eye, fingers swollen with arthritis, accused of plotting against the Tsar. He couldn't walk, could barely breathe. They still dragged him into court, paraded him in chains, read his confession aloud while he drooled down his tunic. The people nodded. Traitor, they muttered. He almost destroyed us. He died that night. His confession lived on, as proof that the state was vigilant, that the walls were secure. Back in the cell, Boris grew quieter. His thoughts folded inward. He began praying in a dead dialect. You recognized bits of old church Slavonic, bits of Latin, not real prayers, half memories. He whispered of cities you'd never seen, text you'd never read. And you realized something, even now, even after the torture, his mind was still sharp. Broken, but not erased. You envied him. Because your own thoughts came slower now. Hunger had taken your edge. The beatings had blurred the timeline. But Boris, he remembered. He catalogued pain like a scholar filing manuscripts. When the guards beat him, he gritted his teeth and whispered dates. When they laughed, he recited law codes. It was madness, yes, but it was also resistance. Criticism? Let's stop pretending the system failed. It didn't. It worked exactly as designed. The dungeon wasn't an accident. It was a policy, a ministry of fear, a production line of suffering that churned confessions like butter. The nobles didn't need real rebels. They needed examples. And political prisoners made the best ones, educated, respected, visible. Their downfall was more poetic, more useful, more instructive. And the church? Still silent, still complicit. Occasionally, a monk would visit, offer communion, offer forgiveness. Boris refused, said his soul wasn't theirs to clean. The monk replied, "Then your soul is damned." Boris smiled. "Then I'm in good company." He died a week later. Fever, infection, maybe just the weight of betrayal. The guards dumped his body beside Alexander's in the trench behind the prison. No grave, no marker, no mention in the records. But you remember. You remember the ink on his fingers, the heat in his words, the way his mind stayed sharp even when his body rotted. And now another one arrives, another scholar, another suspect, another tool for the state's machinery. You look away, not out of fear, out of recognition. Because in a world ruled by paranoia, truth itself is treason. Chapter 8, No Trial, No Mercy. The Tsar decides. There are no courts down here, no judges, no wigs, no gavels, no defence benches or dusty tomes of law. Just the whisper of guilt echoing through corridors slick with mildew, and the memory of a sentence that was never spoken, only felt. If you're waiting for your day in court, forget it. If you're praying for justice, laugh quietly to yourself and move on. Because in medieval Russia, justice wasn't a process, it was a decision. And that decision came from above, not from a panel, not even from the guard. It came from the throne. And once the Tsar had spoken, or simply glanced in your direction, your fate was sealed in ice. Here's the secret everyone knows, but no one says. Your fate was likely decided before your first scream. The moment you were accused, you were done. Maybe it was a fabricated report by a rival noble. Maybe it was a misunderstanding whispered into the ear of a local official. Or maybe, most likely, it was nothing at all, just the inertia of a system built to consume people. Once you were in the dungeon, your existence became bureaucratic ash. A file, if you were lucky. A rumour, if you weren't. A stain on someone else's carpet of rising favour. The Tsar never saw you, of course. Not personally. His time was too valuable for that. But his word? That was everything. A muttered order, a sealed decree, or just a silent nod during a banquet. Any of these could be your execution slip. You might spend years rotting in the dark, all because a clerk wrote your name down slightly too close to someone else's. And once your name was on paper, it belonged to the state. To be erased, rewritten, or forgotten at will. Let's take the myth of the trial. Yes, some were conducted, formally, on parchment, with titles and signatures. But you were never invited. You never spoke. The prosecutor and judge were often the same person, and the outcome was always predetermined. Most trials happened after you were already in chains. Rubber stamps applied to justify what had already been done, and when there was no trial they called it special consideration. That meant you'd been chosen for punishment outside the law. A direct order from above. You should feel honoured. It meant someone important knew you existed, even if only as a problem. The absurdity ran deep. There were cases, many, where prisoners were sentenced to death twice. Once by local decree, then again by royal review. Some were even executed after being cleared. Why? Because the news arrived too late, or a courier was bribed, or a higher official disagreed and scribbled a darker outcome. And sometimes, just sometimes, a pardon arrived. But the guards, not wanting to lose a favourite punching bag, misplaced it. Funny how that worked. You've seen it play out from the inside. One morning, they came for Grigori. He was a quiet man, a former map maker from a merchant town near Tiva, accused of selling border secrets to foreign agents. Ridiculous, of course. He hadn't travelled more than 20 miles in his life, but someone needed to be guilty. And Grigori had a neighbour with a grudge and a cousin in the local garrison. That's how justice worked. He was dragged out in silence. No announcement, no explanation, just 3 guards with ropes and sticks. No priest came, no rites were offered. Hours later, one of the younger guards returned pale, with specks of something dark on his boots. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. We knew. There's a word they use for this kind of justice, oprichnina. It began as a policy under Ivan the Terrible, where the Tsar's personal agents executed traitors without trial, often based on secret evidence or pure suspicion. It became a way to settle scores, crush rivals, or just flex imperial muscle. The Tsar didn't need evidence. He needed loyalty. And loyalty meant punishing enemies, real or invented. Whole families were destroyed on a whim. Entire towns punished because one drunk boyar muttered something about grain taxes during a feast. And the people, they accepted it. Because fear works. Because surviving meant obedience. Because the alternative was sharing a cell with you. Or worse, replacing you. That's how you stayed safe. You pointed the blade somewhere else. It wasn't just men either. Women were sentenced too, often for witchcraft, immodesty, or slandering noblemen. One girl, 16, maybe 17, was chained beside you once. Said she'd refused a noble's proposal. Now her fingernails were gone and her face was purple from slaps. She died in her sleep before they could torture a confession out of her. One guard joked that she saved them the effort. The others laughed. You didn't. And here's the real cruelty: sometimes you weren't executed. You were just forgotten, left in limbo, no sentence, no hearing, no word from above, just years of nothing. One prisoner, Nikolai, said he'd been in for 9 years. No formal charges, no record. Not even a guard knew what he'd done. They fed him anyway, out of habit. He stopped talking around year 6, just hummed to himself and licked condensation off the stones. He died in mid-sentence. No one buried him for 3 days. The guards said they were waiting on paperwork. Criticism? Don't call it injustice. That implies the system failed. But the truth is more terrifying. The system worked exactly as intended. The Tsar's word was final, but the pipeline beneath him was a mess of ambition, fear and sycophancy. No one wanted to question an accusation. No one wanted to be the clerk who hesitated. So they passed the pain downward, rubber-stamped ruin, and prayed that their names never made it onto the sane scrolls. And the church? Silent, of course. Still swinging incense, still blessing state documents, still reminding the condemned that God's judgment awaited after the Tsars. Heaven could wait. Hell was here, with a seal and a signature. You lie there now, knowing this. Knowing that no amount of good behaviour or quiet obedience will earn your freedom. Your fate isn't in the hands of the guards, or the warden, or even the bishop. It's in the mouth of a man miles away, in a palace you'll never see. A man who may never hear your name, who may confuse it with someone else's, who may sign your death warrant between gulps of stew. And until then, you wait, in the dark, in the damp, in silence, because mercy is a rumour, and the Tsar decides everything. The worst part isn't the torture. It's not the hunger, the cold, the smell, or even the guards and their boots and their jokes that rot the air like meat left in sunlight. No. The worst part is the not knowing, the silence, the waiting, the days that stretch into weeks, into months, into years, without word, without verdict, without even the dignity of being told whether you're going to live or die. You begin to understand what it means to be legally invisible. Not declared guilty, not declared innocent, just filed away somewhere. A forgotten breath beneath the Empire's great fur cloak. It doesn't happen overnight. At first you think there's been a delay, that someone's writing up your record, that a clerk lost your document, that maybe, just maybe, someone on the outside is working on your behalf. But as the seasons shift and the walls sweat mould in spring and bleed frost in winter, hope begins to rot, and in its place grows something worse than despair, suspension. You are suspended, not just in chains or time, but in identity. You don't belong to yourself anymore. You're a placeholder, a ghost who still breathes. Everyone down here is waiting on something, a verdict, a letter, a priest, a miracle, but they rarely arrive. And even when they do, it changes nothing. You watched Pyotr once clutch a note from his daughter like it was a holy relic. Took the guards 3 weeks to deliver it. By then, his eyesight was failing. He held the parchment to his face, trembling, weeping, whispering her name like a spell. 2 days later, he died, still smiling. But the smile didn't make it less tragic, just more cruel. The bureaucracy pretends to be blind, but it sees just enough. It sees your name and whether it's attached to a powerful family. It sees your birthplace and whether it's a rebellious province. It sees your occupation and whether you knew how to write. These things matter more than innocence. If you were poor and illiterate, you could vanish in a week. If you were noble and loud, they kept you in longer. Let you rot publicly. Let your reputation wither before your body followed. You heard once about a noble's son, Mikhail, who insulted a minor Tsarist cousin at a feast, said he was drunk enough to think himself royal. That offhand remark, whispered and laughed at, turned into a signed accusation within days. He was dragged to a dungeon, given no trial, and sat in the dark for 16 years. When they finally brought him out, he couldn't speak, couldn't stand. He stared at the sun like it was something he'd forgotten to believe in. They let him go, not from pity, but because he was proof that the Tsar was not to be mocked. even in jest. But most don't even get that ending. They just disappear. There's a word for it, the guards whisper with amusement, zabvenye. The forgetting. When your file is lost. When your accuser dies. When your prison is moved, and no one remembers to bring your name. You're left in the cracks of the Empire's gears. And no one greases the cracks. The psychological weight of that limbo is unbearable. Some prisoners beg for a sentence. Any sentence. To be flogged, branded, exiled, even executed. At least then you'd be real. You'd be acknowledged. But until that happens, you live in bureaucratic purgatory. You are a question mark in a system that only deals in exclamation points. Boris used to mark the days with fingernails scratched into the wall. When we asked him why, he said, "Because even if they forget me, I won't." But over time, the marks grew sloppy. Then they stopped altogether. When asked why, he simply replied, "I forgot what I was counting toward." Criticism? Here's the bitterest truth of all. The state didn't just tolerate this ambiguity. It relied on it. The Tsar could only appear omniscient if his hand didn't tremble. That meant no reconsiderations, no reversals. So the alternative to error wasn't mercy. It was silence. If there was doubt, the system simply didn't act. The accused was neither condemned nor freed. They were frozen, a kind of administrative exile within the walls. And there were incentives to keep it that way. Prison keepers were paid per head. Judges gained favour by avoiding scandal. Bureaucrats feared reprimand if they admitted a wrongful charge. So they did nothing. The safest move in an empire ruled by fear was inertia, which meant your suffering became someone else's shield. You start to adapt to the lack of movement, the lack of sound. Your ears grow sensitive. Every creak, every whisper, every footstep becomes a story. You hear the rustle of paper 2 cells over and imagine it's your pardon. You hear keys and imagine your name finally being spoken. But it never is, not really. You become your cell, a lump in a wall. The mildew recognizes you more than your captors. And still you hear rumours. Of couriers coming. Of reforms whispered in distant cities. Of Tsars who promised more humane treatment. But they never reach here. The dungeon is where rumours come to die. Hope cannot survive below ground, not for long. One prisoner, André, held out for years, wrote petitions in charcoal on scraps of cloth, slicked them under the doors, begged passing monks to carry word. One day he got a reply, a note, unsigned, saying his case was under review. He beamed for a week, sat straighter, spoke kindly. Then, 2 weeks later, the guards came, dragged him out, said nothing. The next day, one of them mentioned that André had resisted, that his file had been moved to a different department. We knew what that meant. So did the rats. Outside, people believed in order, in the Tsar's wisdom, in a state that worked like clockwork. But down here, time means nothing. Law means nothing. The Tsar's wisdom is a rumour built on whispers and rope, and all the parchment in Moscow can't measure the weight of a soul lost to paperwork. You wonder now if you ever had a sentence, if the guard misread your name, if someone meant to free you years ago but spilled wine on the decree. Maybe you're the wrong man. Maybe they're waiting for a confession you never made. Maybe they just forgot. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to see your own name. To hear it said once, not shouted, not condemned, just spoken. Because if no one remembers your name, are you even still alive? Chapter 9, The White Silence. Solitary confinement in ice tombs, silence doesn't come all at once. It arrives in layers. First, the noise around you thins. No coughing, no crying. No muttered prayers from the corner. Then, the motion stops. You no longer see your cellmates. You don't smell them. You're pulled from the rot and the warmth. Yes, even rot has a warmth in numbers. And you're thrown into what they call the white place. It isn't white because it's clean. It's white because of frost. Because of blindness. Because of the chalky, blurry edge your mind reaches when it begins to eat itself from the inside out. This is solitary confinement. not a room, not a chamber, not a punishment. A tomb you're not buried in yet. They don't tell you why, they never do. One moment you're dozing in your corner, the next you're being dragged blindfolded, arms yanked behind your back, feet slipping through slush. You don't fight. Fighting is for people with hope. You're thrown into a space you can't see, a space smaller than your outstretched arms. You hit the floor hard, hear the latch slam behind you. Then nothing. No footsteps retreating, no cruel laughter. Just air. Thin, cold, and endless in its emptiness. This cell isn't measured in feet. It's measured in thoughts. You immediately become aware of your own heartbeat, the way your joints creak, the way your skin tightens in the cold. You speak just to hear your voice. But it doesn't echo. The walls are too close. The air too thick. It's like whispering into cotton. You are muffled. Muted. Unreal. The cold here is different. It doesn't stab. It seeps. It enters slowly, like guilt. Your breath fogs in front of your face, then freezes against the walls. The floor is damp and uneven. You shift to avoid puddles. But every surface is a puddle eventually. There is no blanket, no straw, no light. They might slide food through a gap. They might not. Days pass, maybe. Time is no longer real. Hunger fades, replaced by nausea. Then fatigue. Then hallucinations. You begin to imagine light. That's the first symptom. A flicker in the corner of your eye. A memory of sunrise. But it doesn't move. It doesn't grow, because it isn't real. Then the voices start, not loud, just fragments. A word your mother once said, a line from a sermon. The guards laughing. Except they're not here. That's your mind replaying old tracks, out of desperation for stimulation. Let's talk about why they do this. Solitary confinement wasn't just punishment in medieval Russia. It was reprogramming. The Orthodox Church called it purification. Let him sit in darkness until he hears only the Lord. Nobles called it a cooling-off period. Let him reflect. The state called it nothing at all. They didn't need a name, they needed results. And solitary delivered them. Prisoners placed in these cells lasted, on average, 2 weeks before losing grip on reality. Some began talking to insects, some began eating stone. One man reportedly skinned his own arm to write a letter to God. Another attempted to dig through the wall with his teeth. These aren't legends, these are symptoms. Predictable outcomes of an environment engineered to strip identity. Your body doesn't scream in solitary, it withers, slowly. Joints swell from immobility. Skin cracks from frost. Eyes ache from the dark. Your back hunches. Muscles forget how to support you. You lose height, you lose shape, you lose form. When they drag you out, if they do, you don't look like a man. You look like a folded thing that once was upright. The guards don't need to check on you, that's part of the game. If you scream, they knock on the door, tell you to shut up. If you sing, they laugh. If you stay quiet, they ignore you. You're a noise to them, not a life, not a soul, just part of the soundtrack of power. You tried once to count, just to anchor yourself. You tapped your fingers in sequence, 4-beat patterns, repeated them, for what felt like hours. But eventually you forgot the number, then forgot what you were counting toward. You started over, again, and again, until numbers felt meaningless. There's a term the monks use, hiskaya. It means holy silence, inner quiet, a state where you hear only God. Solitary confinement is a parody of that. It gives you silence, yes, but not peace, only noise from within, regrets amplified, sins exaggerated. You remember every cruel word you ever said, every face you ever disappointed. It loops, endlessly, until you're not sure if the shame is yours or someone else's. Criticism? Don't call this isolation. That's too modern, too soft. This is erasure, a weapon perfected without iron or flame. It costs nothing, requires no staff, no equipment, just a door, a box, and time. And it works. It breaks the proud, the loud, the rebellious. Alexander spent 3 days in solitary once, came back muttering in broken Latin. said the saints had wings made of teeth, died a week later, not from wounds, from fracture. And the church? Of course, they bless the cell, call it a chamber of penance, a holy crucible. They say a man must be alone to hear his soul, but they're wrong. Alone, a man hears only his doubt, his flaws, his sickness, his screams, which sound too much like his father's voice, or his child's, or his own, younger and pleading. You lie down, if it can be called that. The floor is hard, damp. Your hip bones dig into stone. Your breath is the only sound. You count again, or try to. You try to remember a prayer. It turns into a recipe, then into a rhyme, then gibberish. You press your face to the floor just to feel something that isn't your own skin. You dream with your eyes open, see fields, fire, your brother's wedding, your own hands clean and steady. Then nothing. Then the sound of a rat. You open your eyes. It's not a dream. The rat is real. You reach for it, miss. Cry. You didn't know you could still cry. And then you smile, not out of joy, but because the rat saw you. It ran from you. That means you're still real. That means you still matter to something. You whisper to the rat, even though it's gone. Tell them I'm still here. You don't remember falling asleep. You don't even remember the last time your body relaxed enough to do so. In solitary, sleep becomes a series of collapses. You fade in and out of consciousness like a dying fire, flickering between dreams and hallucinations, both equally useless. There is no rest here, only shutdowns. Short blackouts that do nothing but separate one moment of silence from the next. You wake not refreshed, but startled, as if your own heartbeat has betrayed your numbness. The darkness never changes. There's no flicker of torchlight under the door, no hour bell in the distance, no sense of morning or night. Your body forgets what the sun feels like. Your internal clock becomes irrelevant. Hunger arrives, but you don't know when the last meal was. You think you were given water 2 days ago, maybe 3, or maybe last night. You dreamt of a cup, wooden, chipped, full of clean water. But that might have been a memory, or a punishment. By now, your skin is breaking, slowly, not from wounds, but from stagnation. Lying in the same place, pressing your bones into stone, your back begins to blister. Your hips ache constantly. One leg is numb from the cold, the other from being curled too long. You try to stretch, but the cell is too small. You try to shift, but the strength is gone. You whisper things to yourself, not prayers anymore, not names, just noises. Half syllables. Something to prove your throat still works. And then it happens. The moment that always comes. You hear something, a knock, a whisper, a click, and you realize you imagined it. You strain your ears. Nothing. You close your eyes. It comes again. Still nothing. That's the sound of your brain beginning to tear. Not dramatically, not like a rope snapping. Like parchment slowly splitting down the middle. Your thoughts become echoes. They bounce around too long. You hear yourself think and then think again. You begin to argue with yourself, then lose the argument. Time stops being a line. It becomes a pool. Thick, cold, motionless. You dip in and out, and each time you resurface, something is missing. A word, a memory, a rule. You forget the names of your cellmates. You forget your own last name. You know your first name probably, but you whisper it just to make sure. It sounds foreign, like something stolen. You start seeing light again. But now it's everywhere. The corners of the cell flicker, the ceiling pulses. You know it isn't real, but your brain doesn't care. It's trying to fill the void. You welcome it. Better a hallucination than the pitch black, better a false image than the cold truth of absolute nothingness. You see faces sometimes. They look like people you knew once, your mother, your brother, your lover, but wrong. Their mouths don't move correctly, their eyes melt. You stop looking, the rats stop coming. You think maybe they've died, or maybe you've gone too quiet, or maybe you imagined them all along. This is the phase where the guards take notes. They wait until you're in it, deep in it, then open the hatch just long enough to look. They don't speak, they just watch. They nod to each other. Almost there, one says, "He's folding." They don't need to beat you. Not in here. The cell does the work. The absence does the beating. It bruises slower but deeper. Some prisoners reach this point and start singing. Not songs. Sounds. Tones. Moans. Long, low vowels that fill the space like smoke. They don't mean anything. They're just anchors. You think about doing it. You hum a single note. It echoes, then vanishes. You hum it again. Louder. It breaks into a sob halfway through. You stop. Then comes the second silence. The deeper one. The one where even your thoughts begin to feel distant. Like you're overhearing someone else's suffering. Your pain becomes academic. You notice it, catalogue it, describe it in your head as if you're reading from a book. Stomach tight, legs stiff, spine splintering, tongue dry, eyes weeping. It's not yours anymore. It belongs to the body. You are the mind, the soul, detached, floating just above the filth. That's when they open the door, not fast, not loud, just a creak. A shift in air. You blink. You don't move, can't move. Hands reach under your arms. You try to lift yourself. You can't. You are lifted, dragged. Your feet scrape the stone. You blink again. The hallway is too bright. It's not bright at all, just torchlight. But to you it's blinding. You wince. Your body curls. Your eyes burn. You try to speak. Only air escapes. They throw you back into the general cell like old meat. You land wrong. Something pops in your shoulder. You groan. The others look. Some whisper. Most don't. You recognize one face. Maybe. It's Ivan, or someone like him. His eyes are wide. He nods once. You nod back. You've returned. From the white silence. But you are not the same. The others know it. They give you space. Not out of respect. Out of fear. They know what the box does. They've seen it before. Men come back quieter, slower, less real. They walk differently, speak less, eat mechanically, avoid light. You are that now. You are the one they avoid becoming. Criticism? The state never called this cruelty. They called it containment. Regulation. Necessary order. The Tsar's officials didn't need to break your bones. They just had to break your sense of time. And once that was gone, they had you. For good. You were no longer a threat, no longer a thinker. Just another whisper in the dark. And the church? Still blessing the doors. Still calling it cleansing solitude. Still comparing it to the caves of saints. But saints chose solitude. Saints heard God. You heard rats. Screams. Yourself. Then nothing. You lie now in your corner, returned but not restored. You see light again, but it flickers too fast. Your hands shake when you try to hold food. You dream with your eyes open and forget whether you've spoken aloud. Your name comes harder now. You repeat it nightly. You say it to the straw, to the wall, to the bone in your pocket, just to remember. Because next time they drag you into the box, you might not come back. Chapter 10. Bones in the Snow. Death without a name. You always thought death would be loud. A final cry. A gasp. A curse. Something to mark its arrival. But here, in this hole beneath empire and memory, death is quiet. Not peaceful, never that, but quiet. It doesn't rush in with drama. It slips through cracks in the stone, curls beneath collarbones, settles in joints already sore from years of cold. It waits, patient, unhurried. Like everything else in the dungeon, death here knows it has time. No one calls it death, not directly. The guards say he's gone, or that one's cooling, or simply another one. Sometimes they don't speak at all. Just haul the body out by the legs, or let it sit until it stinks too much for even them to ignore. You watch it happen. You try not to count. You do anyway. Because when the only clock you have is the rate at which your neighbours stop breathing, you become a mathematician of misery. It happens more in winter, of course. The cold accelerates everything. Lungs freeze, blood thickens, wounds refuse to close. One night a man coughs through the dark, a hacking bark that rattles deep in his ribs. The next morning he's still, his face covered in frost. You don't wake the guards. Why would you? They'll come when they smell it. That's the real alarm down here, the stink of the body beginning to rot. A smell you learn to identify with a surgeon's precision. First, the iron sweetness of blood long since dried. Then the sour bile leaking up through clenched teeth. Finally, the heavy, head-numbing scent of meat unclaimed by burial. You used to mourn. You'd whisper a name. Close the eyes. Say a prayer. Something half-remembered from a church you visited as a boy. But that stopped months ago. Now you just shift away from the corpse. Try to sleep elsewhere, not out of fear, out of habit, because the dead attract vermin. And you, unlike the body, still have skin left for chewing. Some deaths are quiet, some are noisy, the kind that drag everyone into them. Men who lose their minds first, thrashing, babbling about mothers, rivers, bread. They tear at their own flesh. They scream names of people long buried. One man cracked his skull against the wall until the white shone through. No one stopped him, not even the guards. Especially not the guards. They watched with mild interest. One took bets on how many hits it would take. He got it right. 16. Then there's the slow death. The one you know is coming because the eyes go grey before the mouth stops moving. The one where they stop eating, then stop drinking, then just stop responding. Ivan's going that way now. You've watched it happen in stages. The trembling hand. The confused muttering. The silence. He's curled in the corner, knees to chest, rocking. You've tried talking. He doesn't hear you anymore. He might be alive another day, maybe 2. You're not sure if you should sit near him. What if he dies with his eyes open? When someone dies, the cell rearranges. Not in structure. Nothing changes in the stone or straw, but in mood. The dead man becomes furniture. A fixture. A body-shaped shadow that everyone steps around, avoids touching, pretends not to see, until the guards come. If they come, sometimes they don't. Sometimes a body stays so long it deflates. You don't think about what that means. You just don't sleep near it. Let's talk about burials, or the lack of them. Most bodies are dragged out to the yard behind the prison, dumped in a shallow trench, sometimes covered in snow, sometimes not. No markers. No ceremony, no names carved, no words spoken, just bones in the frost, piled and forgotten. There's no system. No count. You could be thrown onto someone else's grave, a man you once shared bread with, a woman whose face you can't remember but whose cries you still hear in your sleep. And the record keepers? They write deceased. That's it. If you're lucky, your name gets a line. More often, it's unknown male, approximately 30s, or prisoner expired. Expired like milk, like a ration. Not like a person. Never like a person. Criticism? Oh, we've arrived at it. Death here isn't just a byproduct of prison. It's part of its function. The Tsar's justice system doesn't need executioners. It has neglect. It has time. It has winter. The silence of forgotten paperwork is more lethal than a blade. There's no need for trials or hangings when a man can be left to decay slowly, with no witnesses, no resistance, and no voice. And yet the church continues to bless this system. The priests walk past the trench sometimes, glance at the mounds, cross themselves, then move on. They speak of sin and redemption, of divine judgment, but they never name the dead. Never ask why the graves have no crosses. Perhaps because if they looked too closely, they'd see the faces of people who once paid tithes, people who once filled their pews. You think of your own death now, not with fear, not even with sadness, just curiosity. How will it come? Will it be the fever, the cold? Will you go mad and rip your own throat open like the man in cell 12? Or will it be quiet? An eye flutter in the middle of a sentence with no one listening. You don't hope anymore, you plan. Not for escape, for exit. You've started collecting straw. A little pile hidden under your arm when you sleep. You tell yourself it's for insulation, but really it's for a pillow. So that when the time comes, your head won't rest against stone. so that you'll feel something between you and the grave. Outside, it's snowing again. You can't see it, but you know. You feel it in the air, the way it stills, the way it presses. Maybe that's where they'll take you. Into the snow, into the pit, a shovel of dirt, a laugh, a new prisoner entering, asking where you slept, and someone will say, right there, where it's warm. There comes a point, quiet, unspectacular, when the living begin to resemble the dead. It doesn't happen with a scream or a final breath. It happens gradually, subtly, like frost forming on the inside of glass. A shift in posture, a slowness in the blink, a silence that no longer feels voluntary. You wake one morning, if it is morning, and realize the man beside you hasn't moved in hours. You nudge him, no response. You wait, still nothing. You don't call for help. Because by now, you know what death looks like. You've seen it so many times, it no longer startles. It just confirms what you already suspected, that we are all dying. Some just finish sooner. The hardest part is not the dying. It's the remembering. Not remembering the outside world. That vanishes early. The faces of your mother, your sister, your wife. Those fade within weeks. What lingers is memory in fragments. The smell of boiling potatoes. The sound of dogs barking during snowmelt. A flash of colour, red maybe, or green. You think you saw a goose once, waddling through mud. You don't know when. But you see it every time you blink. No, the real remembering is inside the cell. You begin to forget who died. Their names, their voices, their stories. You remember they were here. You remember someone sleeping by the door, coughing during sleep. You remember someone with a deep scar across his cheek, but you can't recall his name, or what he did, or if he was real at all. You ask Ivan what's left of him anyway, but he doesn't answer. He doesn't remember either. Or maybe he's dead now. You're not sure. The dead aren't just gone. They linger. In odour, yes. In rot, in stain. But more than that, in atmosphere. Their absence is weight. You feel it. A spot where a man used to sit becomes colder than the rest of the room. You find yourself not sitting there out of instinct. Someone shivers and says, "Don't sleep where Andre died." No one argues. No one says his name out loud again. The guards don't care. They know death is part of the routine. One asked once, casually, if anyone had expired over the weekend, as if checking for spoiled meat. When no one answered, he stepped inside, counted heads, and nodded. "One light," he said, pointing at the pile in the corner. He dragged the body out with one hand. The rest of us turned away, not out of respect, out of habit. They don't always take the bodies out right away. Sometimes they wait, sometimes they forget. Sometimes they want to see how long it takes before someone else goes. Disease becomes a test. Hunger becomes a wager. The longer they leave the corpse, the more it becomes scenery. You begin to work around it, sleep around it, joke about it. "He won't mind if I borrow his spot," someone whispers. You smirk. You hate yourself for it, but you smirk. Humour is one of the last human instincts left. Eventually, you stop marking the deaths. Not because you don't care. Because there are too many, too frequent. The math becomes numbing. 3 this month, 5, 1 last night, maybe, you forget. Even the straw begins to forget. It compacts over them like soil, slowly hiding what no one wants to see. One day, someone lies down on a patch of warmth and says, "Feels nice." No one tells him why. You start thinking about your own death more deliberately now. Not fearfully, strategically. You ration your strength, not to survive, but to choose. You want to be sitting up when it happens. Or maybe lying face down, like your father did after a long day in the fields. You want your last breath to be silent, not a gasp, not a wheeze, just one last exhale, gone, like mist. But even this desire is a luxury. Most don't choose. Most die in fits, in sleep, in panic. You saw one man claw at the wall as his heart failed, trying to dig his way into the stone. His nails snapped. He didn't scream. He just kept scratching until his hand stopped moving. Another choked on his own tongue. No one turned him over. You couldn't reach him in time, or maybe you didn't try. Outside, the trench is always ready, the burial ground. They call it that, but it's just a pit. A frozen bowl carved out of permafrost. No one digs graves in winter. They just stack. The newer bodies push the older ones down. They compress like logs in a wet pile. You once asked a guard how many were buried there. He shrugged. Enough. He laughed, spit, walked away. You thought about pushing him into it. One day, a priest arrives. He doesn't enter. He stands outside the bars, swings a censer, mumbles Latin. He doesn't look at you. Doesn't bless the living. He blesses the dead. Requiescat in pace, he says. You want to ask, who, which one? But you stay silent. You know the answer. None. All. Whoever's next. Criticism? The Tsar's system never feared death. It relied on it. A dead man doesn't rebel. A dead man doesn't write letters. A dead man doesn't testify. And a dead man doesn't need feeding. This wasn't punishment. It was inventory management. Rot replaced rope. Frost replaced verdicts. Hunger replaced trial. No need for gallows when the cell kills more efficiently. And the church? They say death is a passage, a trial of the soul. But what trial did these men face? Hunger? Fever? Rats? Where is the dignity in dying nameless? Where is God in a cell where the last words spoken are incoherent groans through bloody teeth? You try to remember your own name now. Say it aloud. It sounds off. Like a name someone else had once. You repeat it. Again, you add your father's name, then your village, then your trade. It helps. A little. You whisper, I was a shoemaker. You touch your fingers. I had hands that worked. You cry. Quietly, not from sadness, from memory, from trying to stitch yourself together with fragments before they disappear too. The man beside you dies during the night. You don't know when. You wait to his shoulder against yours. His head tilted down. You sit up. Say nothing. A rat crawls over his legs. You don't stop it. You whisper his name if you remember it. You think it was Yuri. Or maybe not. Doesn't matter. You say it anyway. Someone will say the same for you. Someday soon. And the rats will keep coming. And the snow will keep falling. And your body will become warmth for the next. Chapter 11. The Lie of Survival. Those who made it out. They talk about survival like it's victory. As if living through the dungeon means you've beaten it. As if the man who limps out through the gate, bent and blind in one eye, breathing the outside air for the first time in a decade, is somehow free. But that's the lie. Survival here isn't winning. It's enduring the slow erasure of everything that made you human, your name, your body, your mind, and walking into the sunlight carrying only your bones and a head full of ghosts. You've seen it a few times. A prisoner released. Not pardoned. No one's ever really pardoned. Just removed. The paperwork says, sentence complete. As if there was ever a sentence. As if time was something measured honestly down here. The man steps out, not running, not weeping, just blinking like a newborn, hands trembling. The guards don't cheer. They shove. The prisoners don't celebrate. They turn away. And the man, he doesn't look back. Because he knows what still waits behind him. And because the worst part is, he doesn't feel relief. He feels confusion. You remember Dmitri, big man, fisherman's arms, a laugh like thunder. They took him in for suspicious gatherings. He'd been teaching peasants how to write. Spent 6 years in the dungeon. Came out half his weight, missing half his teeth, muttering to himself. He didn't walk to the gate. He shuffled, dragging one foot behind him like a chained dog. When they opened the door, he just stood there. Didn't cross, didn't believe it. One of the guards had to push him out. Fly, bird, he said, mocking. Dmitri fell to his knees outside. Sat in the snow for hours. Didn't cry, didn't speak, just sat. As if waiting to be called back. Because that's the truth. Once you've lived like this, the world outside stops making sense. Streets feel too wide, trees too green, people talk too fast, they smile too much. You see a woman laugh, and it sounds like screaming. You hear children play, and you flinch. Sunlight is a knife across your vision. Food tastes like salt rubbed into wounds, and sleep, real sleep, feels like drowning. Survival changes the body first. You age fast, teeth rot, joints fail, eyes blur. Men who enter the dungeon at 20 leave looking 60. Bones don't forget the cold. Your back stays hunched. Your hands twitch when they don't hold something. Your breath comes short, shallow, like you're still rationing it. Even standing up straight feels dishonest, like a lie against gravity. But the real ruin is internal. Memory breaks in odd places. You forget how to speak in full sentences. You forget faces. You mix dreams with truth. Sometimes you forget your own name, until someone says it. Then it hits like a blade. Sharp. Alien. You nod, not out of recognition, but fear. Yes, you say, that's me. But inside, you're not sure. Worse are the dreams. They don't stop. They just change flavour. In the dungeon, dreams were soft distractions, fields, food, music. Now they're replayed horrors. The lash, the laughter, the silence, the bodies, the long wet coughs. You dream of rats and wake up swatting at your legs. You see shadows in the corners of your room and mistake them for guards. You hear boots and your heart stops. And always, always, you feel watched. Even alone. Especially alone. Some try to return to life, to families, to farms. But what do you say to a child who has grown without you? To a wife who has buried you in her heart 100 times over? To neighbours who were too afraid to ask where you went? What do you say when they look at you and don't see a man? Just a reminder of what the Tsar can do. Dmitri tried fishing again, lasted 3 days, said the water whispered to him, said he saw fingers in the riverbed, gave his nets away and moved to the forest, built a hut, never spoke to anyone again. They found him months later, cold, curled around a journal made from birch bark. It was blank. Another man, Yegor, took work as a gravedigger, said it helped him sleep. Every hole he dug, he whispered a name into. Sometimes his own, sometimes others. They say he never cried, just dug, until he didn't. And yet the church, the state, the storytellers, they all point to men like this and say, see, he survived. He endured. They paint murals of martyrs with shining eyes, write hymns to endurance, preach that pain purifies, but they never show you what comes after. The emptiness. The walking corpse with no words left, the nights spent staring at a wall because sleep brings back the smell of mildew and burning flesh. Criticism. Call it what it is. Survival was a sentence in itself. A secondary punishment. A delayed execution. They let you live, but took away everything worth living for. They broke the body and left the shell to walk among the living as proof, not of mercy, of power. Because for the Tsar's system, a man who dies is a problem disposed of. But a man who survives, he becomes propaganda. He becomes a lesson. Look what happens to those who defy. Look what's left of them. Let them wander. Let them be seen. Let them infect the dreams of others with their hunched posture and shaking hands. Let them remind everyone, this is what you become. And the church? Still complicit. They hold ceremonies for the returned. Ring bells, offer candles, pretend it's a resurrection. But there's no joy in those men's eyes, no light, just echoes. The priest says, welcome back. The man nods. But inside, he never left. The cell is still there, always. It never unlocks. You think about your own chances, about leaving, about what would be left of you if you did. You used to imagine it with hope. Now, you're not so sure. Maybe this place already is the afterlife. Maybe you died years ago and just never got the message. Maybe surviving means carrying the dungeon with you forever, in your bones, in your breath, in every step you take toward a world that no longer fits. You lie in the dark, and for the first time, you don't dream of freedom. You dream of silence, not the kind in the box, the real kind, the final kind, not because you crave death, but because you've seen what survival looks like, and you're not sure it's better. Survivors don't talk much. You'd think they would. After years buried alive, you'd expect them to scream their truth into the sky. But they don't. Not because they're humble, not because they've found peace, but because there's no one left who truly wants to hear. Words fail them, or maybe the world fails them. Either way, silence clings to them tighter than their own shadow. You see it in their walk, careful, mechanical, rehearsed. Like every step might trigger the floor to collapse beneath them. Because in their minds, it already has. When a man walks out of a Russian dungeon, he doesn't return to life. He drags it behind him, piece by piece. He doesn't go home. He haunts it. The street where he was born is narrower now. The neighbours don't make eye contact. Some cross themselves when they see him, not out of respect, but out of fear. As if surviving that place made him untouchable, or cursed. He's not seen as a man who endured. He's seen as someone the state forgot to kill. Those who welcome him home, if any, are hesitant. His children are taller now, or dead. His wife has remarried, or disappeared. His name, once whispered in prayer, was long ago spoken in shame. Because for every man who vanishes into the walls of the dungeon, a story grows in the silence he leaves behind. Maybe he was guilty. Maybe he betrayed someone. Maybe he said something. Maybe he deserved it. That's what people need to believe, because if he didn't, then they might be next. So the survivor returns not to a welcome, but to a cold re-entry. His past is gone. His future is limbo. He walks into a world that has moved on without him, and he doesn't ask it to stop. He just wants to find a quiet place to sit, preferably alone. Somewhere he can listen to the wind and remind himself that it's not just the air from a cracked cell door. You've heard about men who turned to God, who built shrines, who starved themselves into visions. They walk through towns wrapped in rags, babbling about judgment. People call them mad saints. Touch their feet. Feed them crumbs. But you know the truth. They're not holy. They're broken. They're what happens when pain becomes too big for one soul to hold. They pour it into religion because it's the only vessel left. Others vanish entirely, move north, build cabins in the woods, live among wolves in silence. They eat moss, speak to trees, name rocks after the people they used to know. They become myths. Don't go too far into the forest, children are told. That's where the forgotten live. But forgotten doesn't mean gone. You suspect the forest has more of your kind than any village. Then there are those who try to return to work, to usefulness. A man who once carved wood now stares at his tools like they're foreign. His hands shake. The chisel slips, blood on the floor again. A woman once accused of heresy tries to bake bread, but the oven reminds her of smoke, of screams, of her own child's name burned out of her memory. She stops baking. And still the stories about strong survivors persist, written by people who never lived it. He rebuilt his life, they write. He forgave. Forgave who? The guard who broke his jaw? The judge who never read his case? The priest who blessed his sentence? Or the town that left his wife to starve and never asked a single question? Criticism. This is where the empire perfected its cruelty, not just by caging men like dogs, but by releasing them like monsters. The state let them out not to restore balance, but to warn others. A man walking with a limp, a hollow stare, a twisted back, he became a billboard for obedience. This is what happens to those who speak out, he said without speaking. The lesson was stitched into his posture, etched into his teeth. And the church? Oh, they love the redemption arc. They write songs about it. From dungeon to divinity, one hymn says. His suffering washed him clean. They baptize pain. They turn it into metaphor. But ask the survivor, was your soul cleansed? Was your silence holy? Or was it survival, plain and bitter, carved out one breath at a time? You remember one man, Semyon, who came back from the white cells after 14 winters, thin as a rake, eyes like broken glass. He smiled too much, but never with joy, always like a man trying to remember what joy was supposed to feel like. He used to mutter, "I am not the same, I am not the same," like a chant. He didn't say what happened in solitary. He didn't have to. We saw it every time he flinched at his own reflection. He lived 3 years after release. They say he drowned in a shallow stream. No one's sure if he slipped or if he just knelt. The worst part? The survivors sometimes envy the dead. Because the dead don't dream of walls. They don't wake screaming. They don't recoil from touch. They don't relive the betrayal of their own bodies, the hunger, the decay, the weakness. The dead don't count years. The dead don't wonder what their life might have been. The dead don't remember, but the living do. And memory is a heavier sentence than chains. You lie awake now, and you wonder if they opened the door, truly opened it, and said, "Go," would you even move? Could you trust the light? Could you step into air without smelling damp stone? Could you eat bread without crying? You're not sure. Because the cell doesn't end at the gate, it follows you. It is you. Chapter 12. Buried Twice. How history forgot them all. Not all burials happen in the ground. Some take place on paper, in silence, in the empty margins of history books, where names are never written, where deeds are never recorded, where suffering is acknowledged with a shrug or a single dry sentence. Conditions were harsh. That's it. That's the legacy of thousands. Forgotten not just by time, but by intention. You were erased twice. First by the dungeon, then by the people who decided your life wasn't worth remembering. And that is perhaps the deepest cruelty of all. You always thought the pain would end with death, that once the breath left your body, once the rats and frost had their way, you'd be done. But you were wrong. Because the pain doesn't end, it mutates, it passes on in the form of oblivion. A clean slate, a new regime, a new priest, a new czar, all eager to forget what you were, what they did, and why it mattered. They rename the prison, paint the walls, burn the records, appoint a new warden, declare reforms. That was a darker time, they say. Now we are civilized, but the foundation stays the same, and the echoes of the dead remain sealed in the bricks. No plaque bears your name, no monument stands in your honor, no child is taught the truth of what was done. You are gone. And worse, your absence is convenient. One day a historian visits, a young man, soft hands, eyes full of idealism. He asks questions, takes notes. How many died? He wonders aloud. No one answers. Because the number is unknowable. Because the bodies were stacked like firewood, carted off in silence, dissolved into snow. Because no one wanted to know. The young man nods solemnly. He writes, mortality was high, and that's all you'll ever be to him, a statistic. The problem with survival, with death, with memory in the system, is that it's not linear, it's not neat. The truth of what happened in these dungeons doesn't fit in textbooks. It doesn't have dates and treaties and neat boundaries. It's not a war, it's not a law, it's a practice, a method, a culture of disposal. And cultures don't change by decree. They shift by erasure, by denial, by turning bodies into silence. You once knew a man named Pavel. He'd been a minor clerk in some provincial town, arrested for tampering with state documents, which everyone knew meant correcting a noble spelling mistake. He was imprisoned, tortured, never tried, and died in year 3. His family asked about him for years, wrote letters, appealed to the church, sent food that was never delivered. One day, they stopped asking. The state said they had no record. No one by that name is in our custody. And just like that, he disappeared. But you remember, you saw him go, you saw what was left. You see, history doesn't forget. It chooses what to forget. Every regime buries its sins beneath the flag of order. Every empire needs a clean conscience. And prisons like this, dark, wet, filled with bones and whispers, they are scrubbed from the official story. They become footnotes, myths, exaggerations. People say, it couldn't have been that bad. And you want to scream, it was worse. You try to imagine your name in a book. Written properly, spelled right, dates correct. Crimes listed, crossed out, declared false. Maybe a chapter about injustice. A teacher standing before a class, voice heavy with sympathy, saying, they didn't deserve it. But you know better. The only place your name exists is here, in your own head, scratched into the stone wall in urine or blood, already fading. The newer guards don't even ask anymore. They don't care what your crime was. They don't know how long you've been here. You're just one more shuffling figure in the dark. And when you die, someone will sweep you into the trench, and the state will call it routine processing. They'll issue no notice, they'll burn your file, or worse, never file it at all. And yet the church rings its bells, prays for the Tsar, sings hymns about mercy. But never once do they say your name aloud. Never once do they ask who was lost. They light candles. But the wax melts faster than justice ever came. Criticism? Don't say the system failed, say it succeeded. It killed you, then convinced the world you were never real to begin with. It turned your body into a whisper, then turned the whisper into a myth, then erased the myth altogether. The perfect crime. No fingerprints, no records. Just another cold stone wall in a forgotten corridor. One day, a new prisoner arrives. Young, confused, hope still flickering in his eyes. He asks your name. You hesitate. You want to answer. You open your mouth, but nothing comes out. It's been too long. The name is buried somewhere beneath the years, the pain, the silence. You pause. You lie. Doesn't matter, you say. Because it doesn't. Because if no one remembers you, and even you forget, then you are truly gone. Buried. Twice. You were never meant to be remembered. That was clear from the beginning. From the moment your name was scribbled onto a ledger in some dim-lit hall by a man who never looked up, you knew your life had entered a kind of twilight. You were not a person anymore. You were a cautionary tale, a rumour, a scrap of guilt sewn into someone else's survival. And when you died, because everyone dies in the dungeon, whether in body or just in soul, it was not an event. It was an administrative function. A line crossed out. A bed freed. Nothing more. And that's the final truth, isn't it? You weren't just buried in the ground. You were buried in the silence that followed. The silence of the priest who didn't speak your name. The silence of the historian who skipped your century. The silence of your own descendants who never knew you existed. You died once in the cell, and then again in the archives, and then again every time someone walked past your prison and called it old history. It wasn't old, it was deliberately forgotten. There's a rot to that kind of forgetting. A societal infection. Because the systems that buried you are still here. Cleaner, more subtle, but just as deadly. You see it in every smiling official who says, we've reformed. You hear it in every guide who calls the prison a heritage site and laughs about ghosts. You read it in every textbook that skips the details and instead writes, justice evolved. But evolved into what? A new dungeon with fresher paint? A legal system that still breaks the poor first and fast? Is the man who freezes in chains less frozen because he has a trial date now? Is he less afraid because the torch was replaced by electric light? And yet you want to believe. You want to believe someone will dig up the truth. That some future scribe, digging through rotted papers and brittle walls, will find your name scratched on a stone and say, he mattered. You want to believe there is value in the record. that someone might rebuild your story from the fragments, whisper it in the halls where you once bled, and give you back a sliver of dignity, even if it's centuries late. But hope is dangerous. That was always the joke in here, wasn't it? Hope is the cruelest shackle. It lets you think there's something more than decay. It lets you imagine a dawn after this endless night. You knew men who clung to it like fire and were gutted when the years burned it down. And you knew others, smarter perhaps, who let go of hope early, who accepted the silence, who made peace with being forgotten. You don't know which path was right. All you know is this: the dungeon never really lets go, not of its prisoners, not of its past. It lingers, in the way people fear authority, in the way they whisper in public, in the way they pretend not to see injustice, because seeing it would mean acting, and acting might land them in the same pit you died in. The dungeon becomes a metaphor, a memory, a mould. It grows beneath the skin of a nation. And the people? They learn to speak around it, to tell stories without mentioning the walls, to praise the empire and blame the enemy, to celebrate survival without asking what was survived. Sometimes you wonder if it would have been better to vanish entirely. No name, no story, no pain passed on. Just a man who slipped into the soil without a trace. At least that's clean. At least it doesn't allow for sanitization. At least there's no chance of some politician standing on your grave centuries later saying, "We honour their sacrifice." As if this was sacrifice, as if it was voluntary, as if you died for a reason other than state laziness and cruelty. But that's what happens, isn't it? They turn your cage into a symbol. They sell tickets to your torment. They frame your bones in glass. Exhibit B, the iron collar of discipline. They make art out of agony, and they call it remembrance. Let me ask you, is a memory real if it's been washed clean? If your life story is rewritten to be palatable, does that honour you or kill you again? In the deepest part of the prison, where the stones still stink of mildew and regret, where no tourist goes, where no candle reaches, there is still a name scratched into the wall. It's yours, not the one you were born with, the one the dungeon gave you. A final whisper in cracked brick, faint, almost erased, but not quite. And in that, maybe, just maybe, there's something like survival. Not the kind they write hymns about, not the kind they stamp in history books, but a quieter, angrier kind. The kind that sits like smoke in the bones of a people. The kind that turns forgetting into a sin. The kind that infects even the cleanest version of history with the rotten truth you carried. Because you weren't a hero, you were a prisoner. And they buried you twice. But you're still speaking, even now, especially now. Let's be honest, this wasn't justice. This wasn't even punishment with purpose. What medieval Russia built wasn't a correctional system. It was a slow-motion execution machine, powered by neglect, superstition, and a frightening indifference to human life. They didn't see prisoners as people. They saw them as stains on parchment, something to be blotted out, erased, and forgotten. The dungeon wasn't about law, it was about control. It didn't matter if you were guilty or innocent. It mattered if you could be used as an example. Criticism? I have plenty. The state weaponized starvation instead of feeding prisoners with the same grain rotting in storehouses during winters. Guards, drunken, violent, half-literate, were handed absolute power with no oversight. Priests walked these corridors like mute spectators, swinging incense as if God could not smell the filth and fear. And the Tsar? He was more ghost than ruler to these men. His word either a death sentence or worse, a silence that left prisoners in endless limbo. And yet, let's not forget, Russia at this time had resources. It had forests of timber, fields of grain, churches full of wealth, even trade routes with fur, honey and salt. These resources weren't used to improve life inside the prisons because cruelty was cheaper and fear was easier. They chose suffering over structure. Imagine, for a moment, if we had been there, if we could walk into that frozen hell with the knowledge we hold today. The first change would be organization. Simple record keeping could have saved lives. Most men didn't die from executions. They died because they were forgotten. A basic log, a system of regular checks, could have prevented nameless deaths. Second, food distribution. Grain surpluses existed. They were hoarded by boyars and traders. If these were redirected, even scraps of rye, salted fish, or boiled roots, prisoners wouldn't have wasted away. This wasn't a matter of scarcity. It was deliberate negligence. We could have set up simple clay ovens, used the forests for firewood, and fed them with porridge and broth, enough to keep them alive. Third, sanitation and space. The biggest killers weren't just hunger but disease festering in those dark pits. A solution as basic as regular straw changes, drainage of wastewater, or communal open-air hours could have prevented the rot. Even the poorest village managed cleaner barns for livestock than these dungeons kept for people. And perhaps the most radical solution, rehabilitation. Instead of leaving prisoners to rot, we could have used them for structured labour, carpentry, farming, fishing, giving them a reason to stay alive. Many of these prisoners were skilled artisans, traders, even scholars. The state crushed talent that could have strengthened its economy. If I had stood there watching these men cough blood in the dark, I would have said, "This is not order, this is not law, this is rot disguised as power." You cannot build an empire on silence and starvation. You must give even your lowest men a chance to work, to live, to return better than they came. Because fear fades, but fairness lasts. Would they have listened? Probably not. Power rarely listens when it's drunk on itself. But I would have left them with this truth. The strongest Tsar is not the one who breaks the most men, but the one who fixes the broken and turns them into hands that build rather than bones in the snow.